Chapter 25, Daniel. The second carriage had fallen behind somewhere before the outer district gate. Nothing serious, just a warding fluctuation in one of the axle seals. The steward had offered a thorough explanation, which Daniel barely listened to. He nodded once and stepped down without fanfare. "I'll go ahead," he said. The steward bowed and stayed behind. Daniel didn't need an entourage to walk into a house that bore his name. He preferred to see it alone first. The Joe estate rose in modest symmetry from the merchant quarter of the outer district. Traditional architecture, clean lines, mid-tier wealth with clear aspirations. Not noble grandeur, but pride worn visibly. The front gate opened with quiet precision. No drums, no staff announcements. Just a house butler in dark robes bowing low with a practiced, neutral smile. "Welcome home, young master." Daniel inclined his head in return. Home. It was a word he still didn't know how to wear, because it wasn't his home. It never had been. His home was a fourth-floor walk-up in San Francisco's Chinatown. God, I hope Mom's okay. Daniel didn't walk straight in. Instead, he turned down a side corridor and found his way to an elevated stone terrace overlooking the back courtyard. He recognized the layout, but only because of Ethan's memories. A strange phenomenon. "It's weird for me, too," Ethan said in the back of his mind. Daniel nodded. No point pretending it wasn't strange. Still, there was something grounding about the rhythm of the place. It was neat, orderly, unpretentious. It reminded him strangely of the back entrance to the old community center where he used to spar. That made it easier to breathe. The crystal pulsed in his pocket again. Imperial blue, state-etched with layered sigil codes embedded in the surface like heat-stamped clearance tags. Daniel pulled it out and turned it over in his palm. "So, no home button," he muttered. "Whoever did the technical design on this is an idiot." "Your mentor designed that." Daniel paused. "It's like trying to combine analog and digital systems without the proper parts." He rolled the crystal between his fingers. "The interface is a disaster. No intuitive controls, poor user feedback, and it heats up like it's trying to fry itself. This is the pinnacle of system design. Now you know why I wanted to change it. You should hear the Imperial Mana technicians talk about this stuff. Typical government tech. Let me guess. They think they're the greatest thing since sliced bread? The typical empire. And why is sliced bread so great? Did your people only recently discover bread or cutting?" Daniel shook his head. "Just don't trigger the long-range alert beacon by accident," Ethan added. "You'll have 3 different clerks yelling at you in 6 dialects." Daniel snorted and whispered the activation phrase. The crystal flared, then hummed as the registry accepted his key. He rolled his eyes. "This thing is insane." "It's Imperial issue," Ethan said. "Originally designed to track generals. Now it's how most of the Empire communicates. And there's this strange phenomenon where commoner girls become really famous. It's odd." "So, influencers are universal," Daniel muttered, "letting private conversations go viral across your empire." "What's an influencer?" Daniel groaned. The verification completed. He pocketed the crystal, adjusted his robes, and looked toward the main entrance. Voices floated in familiar. Claire. Which was odd, considering he hadn't dated her. Claire with her perfect, politically tuned inflection. Claire with just enough charm to dazzle without ever warming the room. His Ethan's mother's voice followed, layered with excitement and pride. Then another voice, too loud, too smooth. Caleb. Daniel rolled his shoulders once. "You think he's ready?" "He thinks he is," Ethan replied. "He's going to perform. Try to reclaim the room." "You're a threat he didn't plan for." Daniel nodded. "Well," he said, "let's ruin his day." "I hope it pleases." "It's lovely," Margaret said quickly. "Thank you, dear." Daniel straightened. That was when he saw Caleb. He hadn't changed physically, still carried himself like a man who believed he had something worth guarding, but his eyes, they glittered with performance. Claire shifted slightly when she saw Daniel. It wasn't surprise. It wasn't welcome, but it was something. She looked at him like she was trying to place him again. "Look who made it," Caleb said, voice smooth and just loud enough to carry. "I was worried House Lee might have forgotten to send someone." Daniel turned his gaze slowly. "Not this time," he said. "Though I hear forgetting can be contagious." The air dipped just a touch. Caleb leaned back and poured himself a cup of wine. Of course, not every marriage makes it past the paperwork. Some pairings are ceremonial, the kind that don't require intimacy. The sisters blinked. Claire's head barely moved, but Daniel saw the tension in her grip. He smiled mildly. Ceremonial bonds are still honored bonds. The strongest walls often begin with clean lines on paper. "That's poetic," Ethan murmured. "But he won't understand the dig." Caleb snorted. spoken like a man well-versed in getting stopped by walls. Another sip. Claire rose and walked toward her father, setting the teacup in front of him without comment. Emily and Elise giggled nervously in the corner. Daniel raised an eyebrow. That didn't make any sense. Is your brother an idiot? Undeniably, Ethan said with a laugh. Daniel stood. The air of indifference rolled off him like mist from a forbidden mountain. And that, he realized, was why Caleb was fidgeting beneath the surface. The room buzzed with polite noise and the unspoken pressure of a power struggle. Neither side acknowledged outright. But Caleb kept smiling. Too wide, too sharp. He poured more wine, slow and theatrical, like the act itself was a performance. So, Caleb said, as if continuing a private joke, how's it feel, Ethan? Daniel didn't answer. Caleb didn't stop. I mean, I suppose you get your own room, your own projects, your own sword. Very ceremonial, very tidy. But tell me. He leaned forward. Does it get strange? Living in a house where your wife won't even acknowledge you? Daniel's jaw tightened. Claire's fingers froze mid-pour. Caleb pressed on. I mean, Vivian Lee, one of the most beautiful women in the Empire, and she's out there touring provinces while you're stuck polishing scrolls. He smirked. Maybe she's just smart enough to know that cold steel doesn't belong in her bed. Daniel stood. No word, no warning. He didn't posture, he just moved. 3 steps. Direct, fluid. And then he slapped Caleb across the face. Hard, not wild. Not theatrical, just clean, sharp, deliberate. Caleb jerked back, stunned. One hand flew to his cheek, eyes flashing red with sudden rage. The room froze. Claire stiffened but didn't move. The twins gasped. Margaret's hand fluttered near her throat. Robert Joe didn't react yet. He simply watched. Calculating, Caleb's hand dropped to the hilt of his blade. Daniel's followed. He didn't draw, didn't blink, didn't need to. You slapped him? Ethan's voice rang out in his head, tight with disbelief. You slapped our brother? In front of our parents? Now you fight back? Yup. What are you thinking? That I'd like to see what he does next. Wait, you're not even mad? No. I just don't like being tested by amateurs. And everything he said? He's not wrong, per se. Outwardly, Daniel's expression was ice. His posture radiated barely restrained violence. Caleb, brother, Daniel said softly, too softly. I'm only going to say this once. His voice was flat, measured, deadly. You do not speak about my wife in my presence, ever. Not in jest, not in contempt, not even in theory. His eyes didn't waver. You have opinions? Good. Keep them. Lock them in your throat. Swallow them if you must. A heartbeat passed. Then Daniel added, voice just sharp enough to make the tension sing, because if you speak her name again with that tone, you won't be drawing a sword. You'll be digging a grave. Caleb's fingers twitched on the hilt. Daniel didn't move, didn't blink. Internally, he was curious. Would Caleb strike? Would he back down? Was there still enough of Ethan's brother in there to choose sense over pride? You're enjoying this, Ethan muttered. Only a little. Slowly, grudgingly, Caleb's hand fell away from his weapon. He didn't speak. Didn't meet Daniel's eyes. Daniel stepped back half a pace, lifted his hand from the hilt of Chinglin's silence. The moment ended, but the chill it left behind stayed. Caleb stood, fists clenched, jaw tight. I will say what I please. Pop. Daniel thumbed the clasp of Chinglin's silence. The faint click of steel clearing the sheath made everyone jump, and then the door opened. Caleb's hand was still half tensed on the hilt of his sword when the knock sounded, not the polite rap of a steward, not the muted step of a servant. A deep, resonant chime rolled through the estate formal. Regal. The kind of tone that accompanied a state visit, not a family brunch. Low, resonant, formal. Not a servant's announcement, something closer to a ritual. Every conversation died instantly. Daniel turned toward the main doors. He heard them before he saw them. Silver wind flutes, cold and precise, playing a melody that wasn't meant to soothe. It was meant to announce. The doors opened wide. Attendants stepped in first, their robes marked with the Lee crest, formation sharp and silent. Floating trays followed, each one inscribed with layered protection glyphs and bearing chests of tribute. Swords wrapped in beast hide, scrolls sealed in spirit thread, rare coins glinting with imperial crests, vials humming with active mana. and behind them Vivian Lee. She didn't just enter, she descended. Her robes were the kind of ceremonial formal that made others look underdressed just by standing near her. Midnight violet, silver crane embroidery, gliding like flight across the hem, spirit glass threads catching the light with every measured step. She moved like law, no hesitation, no apology, just sovereign control. Her posture was flawless, her expression unreadable, her hair braided and pinned with white jade and lunar combs. Her presence hit the room like a falling banner declaration first. Questions never. Daniel didn't breathe. He didn't need to, because no one was looking at him. Not anymore. They were all looking at her. Claire stiffened. The twins forgot to blink. Margaret Jo actually stood like she wasn't sure if she should bow. Even Caleb stepped back, eyes wide, stunned into silence. Of course he's surprised, Daniel thought. She wasn't supposed to come. She wasn't supposed to back me. And yet here she was, his wife, his force of nature. Vivian Lee didn't say a word, didn't even glance at Caleb. Her assistant May stepped forward with flawless timing. Eldest daughter of House Lee. Heir apparent, Lady Vivian Lee comes bearing gifts and acknowledgement on behalf of the patriarch for the hospitality extended to her husband, Ethan Jo. Daniel's name, spoken cleanly, with weight. Vivian stepped forward. She stopped beside him. Not behind, not ahead. Beside. She didn't touch him, didn't smile. But her presence alone sent a message louder than words. She had arrived. With ceremony. With power. With full House Lee authority at her back. And she had shown up for him. Daniel felt the entire room recalibrate. Caleb slowly lowered his wine cup. Claire's jaw set. Margaret Jo exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for a full minute. Even Robert shifted barely but enough that Daniel noticed. Vivian looked at him then. Just a look. No signal. No nod. Just connection. It wasn't warm. It wasn't soft. But it was acknowledgement. Daniel inclined his head slightly, just enough for her to see it. They didn't need words. Not here. Because this wasn't a conversation. This was House Lee moving a chess piece across the board and daring the room to answer. Daniel stood still, silent, present, and let the silence do its work.
Chapter 26. Margaret Jo. Margaret Jo had always thought herself prepared for anything. She'd raised 4 children, survived a marriage that was equal parts war and partnership, and helped build a respectable name in a court where names cracked like porcelain under pressure. She had learned how to smile without warmth, how to guide without speaking, and how to protect without coddling. But even she wasn't prepared for the entrance of Vivian Lee. Not truly. It had started subtly. The sound of May's voice from the corridor controlled, practiced. Eldest daughter of House Lee. Heir apparent. Lady Vivian Lee has come to present her ceremonial gifts. Then the procession. Dozens of attendants flowed into the Jo household like water finding its level. They carried chests marked with royal sigils, weapons enchanted with radiant inscriptions, vials that shimmered with sealed storms, and scrolls wrapped in imperial ribbon. It was more than Margaret had seen in 2 decades of marriage diplomacy. The weight of it wasn't just political. It was personal. This wasn't a bride making a gesture of courtesy. This was the Lee family making a statement. And then came the girl. No, not a girl. A woman. Vivian Lee stepped into the parlor, and every breath in the room shortened. She wasn't loud. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't even trying. But Margaret had been to enough war councils to recognize when power had entered the room. Vivian's robes were impossibly fine violet, so deep it bled into black, silver-threaded cranes, sweeping across the hem like motion captured in thread. Her braid was pinned with white jade and spirit glass, her expression composed and detached. Her beauty was not soft. It was not warm. It was designed, sculpted, like a deity had tailored her for court and consequence. Margaret didn't often feel small. But beside Vivian, she suddenly understood what her own mother-in-law must have felt on her wedding day. Her eyes swept the room. Caleb looked like someone had poured ice water down his spine. Claire was trying not to blink too much, too fast. The twins, the girls sat spellbound. Ryan was openly gawking. And Ethan stood like a man carved into place. Still, steady, not afraid. He met Vivian's gaze without flinching. And Vivian held it. Margaret hadn't expected that. She hadn't expected this something between them. There was no warmth, but neither was there coldness. No affection, but no hostility. It was level, measured, like 2 matched pieces sliding quietly into place. And suddenly, Margaret Jo found herself afraid of something she hadn't feared in years. Miscalculation. Because whatever Ethan had done, whoever he had become since leaving this household, he had earned that woman's presence. and Vivian Lee did not give her presence easily. For a moment, Margaret felt a flicker of memory Ethan at 17, shoulders hunched, voice too soft, eyes always darting toward exits, always apologizing before he'd even done anything. Smart, yes, but hesitant. Gentle. Passive in the way only gifted second sons learn to be. And now, that boy was gone. From the parlor, Vivian's gaze finally dropped. Not in deference, not in retreat, in purpose. She walked Hutno, glided across the room. Her attendant stilled at the threshold, and the ornate boxes bearing ceremonial gifts floated into position like pieces on a divine board. Then, without prompting, without pageantry, Vivian Lee lowered herself to the floor. Not a shallow bow, not a nod disguised in elegance. She dropped to her knees before Margaret and her husband, head bowed, hands folded, the gleaming arc of her braid falling like a drawn blade across her back. Vivian Lee, daughter of the Lee household and wife to Daniel Joe, does offer apologies to her mother-in-law and father-in-law, she said, her voice low but steady. For the dishonor of allowing my husband to greet you first. As his wife, I should have been at his side. Silence followed. Pure silence. Not a breath. Not a whisper. Even the air stilled, as if waiting to see if this was real. Margaret's throat tightened. It wasn't just that Vivian had bowed. It was that she didn't have to. None of the daughters-in-law were expected to perform those rites. Not in this generation. Not when both Joe's sons had married up politically, magically, socially. The power imbalance was obvious, and etiquette had adjusted accordingly. Vivian could have walked in, nodded once, and been beyond reproach. Instead, she knelt. And in doing so, she'd claimed something no blessing rite, no blood contract could ever offer. Respect? Real respect. Not deference born of tradition. Not fear born of status. Choice. Vivian Lee had chosen to bow, and Margaret couldn't stop staring. Beside her, her husband said something formal accepting the apology, inviting Vivian to rise, but it barely registered. Margaret's eyes stayed on the girl. This woman who had just turned an imperial marriage into something deeply, disarmingly intimate. Vivian rose smoothly, posture immaculate, robes trailing behind her like liquid night. Her expression never cracked. Not even when she turned and met Margaret's gaze again, level, calm, unreadable. But something passed between them, a flicker. Not warmth, not pride. Something else. Recognition. And in that instant, Margaret understood something terrifying. If this marriage held, if this alliance endured, Vivian Lee wouldn't just protect their name, she might elevate it. Vivian Lee had risen from her bow as if the motion had cost her nothing at all. Margaret still hadn't fully recovered. No one had expected the heiress of House Lee to kneel, let alone in a modest family parlor. But she had done so with the precision of someone trained not just to obey ritual, but to weaponize it. And now, as she turned to face the rest of the room, the temperature shifted again. Vivian didn't need to raise her voice. Her presence spoke first. The air around her obeyed without question. Then Caleb, of course, decided to speak. Lady Lee, he said smoothly, lifting his teacup. I imagine the estate must be difficult to leave on such short notice. It's understandable, especially with how often certain retreats call you away. The words were mild. Proper even, but Margaret heard it. Something off in the weight, a tone too casual, too carefully delivered. A few of the younger servants blinked, uncomprehending. But Ethan didn't blink at all, and Vivian, stilled, not visibly, not in posture, but in pressure. Something in the air condensed, pulled tight like a held breath. Margaret glanced at her eldest son. Caleb knew something. That much was clear. She had no idea what. The comment passed through her like a half-formed memory one that brushed the edges of awareness but refused to land. She felt unsettled but couldn't explain why. Vivian, however, offered a smile. Elegant, cool, perfectly controlled. It is disorienting when one's schedule is presumed by others, she said softly. Though I find such confusion rarely comes from those who matter. Caleb's smirk twitched only slightly, but the damage had been done. Vivian turned then, her gaze settling with surgical precision on Claire. The tension in the room changed again, quieter, sharper. Lady Claire, Vivian said, tone still polite. It must be exhausting, always having to remind others to behave themselves. Still, it's important we lead by example. After all, if we can't keep our husbands in line, who will? Claire stiffened. The twins' mouths fell open. Even Margaret blinked. It was not what was said, it was how. The phrasing had no sharp edges, no overt insult. But the implication was unmistakable. Caleb had spoken out of turn. Claire had let him. And Vivian Lee had corrected both of them with the grace of a scalpel. Margaret watched Claire's expression shift just slightly. The perfect calm that usually wrapped around her like perfume cracked at the edges. A tightening of the lips. A sudden interest in her tea. Vivian turned back to the center of the room. To Ethan. She didn't smile. She didn't nod. But she paused. Just long enough to let the moment settle. Margaret looked at her second son, Ethan, standing still, hand casually resting on his sword hilt like he belonged with a weapon nearby. He didn't look away from Vivian. He didn't look shaken. Surprised, maybe. But not shaken. Still, he had no idea what was happening. Chapter 27, Daniel. Daniel had fought assassins in simulations, sparred in dojos across 3 continents, and once hiked 16 miles on a torn ankle because the GPS lied. None of it prepared him for watching Vivian Lee kneel in front of their mother in a move that somehow didn't look subservient at all. It looked like dominance disguised as grace. I offer apologies for the dishonor of allowing my husband to greet you first. As his wife, I should have been at his side. He was having a hard time following what happened after Vivian said that. He stood just to the right of the gift table, posture straight but relaxed, as if his heartbeat weren't quietly hammering behind his ribs. She shouldn't be here. Not because it was forbidden, if anything. Her presence completed the tradition. But she had said she wouldn't come. She hadn't even told him. And he hadn't asked her to. It was supposed to be symbolic at most. He was supposed to arrive alone. So why was she here? Why kneel? Why? Smile? Daniel picked the conversation back up mid-topic. Vivian was trying to give Ethan's father some sort of spell scroll. His father took the scroll with both hands, bowed faintly in return, and tried to hide the tremor in his voice. This is too generous, Lady Lee. Vivian offered the smallest of nods. It is from my father, a record of our house's enduring respect for your leadership and grit. Please give us some face and accept it. Robert Joe, ever the stoic individual, simply nodded. Vivian turned to the twins, who gave her big grins, clearly starstruck. Daniel barely held back a blink as she gestured, and one of the attendants opened a chest with a flourish. Inside, clothes and lots of them. Not just beautiful enchanted. Lined with widow spider silk thread. Each garment tailored in size and style to the twins' exact measurements and favorite colors. He could tell just by the way their mouths dropped open. Vivian spoke softly. Woven with phoenix feather satin and lined with widow spider silk, blended with mana thread from the Eastern Isles. They enhance clarity of thought and internal rhythm. They will offer a certain amount of spell protection. May they serve you in study, safety, and cultivation. The twins bowed in stunned silence. One whispered. She knew our favorite colors. How on earth had she prepared specific gifts in time? Daniel glanced sideways at May, who stood near the parlor doors. She winked. Another gift followed, this time for Ryan, his younger brother. A martial scroll so gilded Daniel could feel the heat of the mana signature from several paces away. Ryan took it with trembling fingers, eyes wide as orbs. And for you, Vivian said, voice gentle but exact. A technique passed through House Lee's outer disciples. Chosen by my youngest brother for someone. Ernest. Ryan nodded quickly. Too quickly. Thank you, Lady Lee. Vivian smiled, not widely, but it was real. Daniel felt his stomach twist in a way that had nothing to do with danger. He didn't trust moments like this. Not when they were this perfect. Not when the same woman had given him a speech about boundaries and disinterest just days ago. Then again, that was the moment he told her he didn't want her affection. He wasn't chasing her. Maybe she was getting back at him. She turned next to his mother. A second chest opened. Daniel couldn't see inside. But whatever it was made Margaret Joe gasp. A legacy stone, she breathed. Bound? Vivian nodded. With my own memories tied to my oath. A thank you for raising a son worthy of House Lee. Daniel's mother didn't speak. She just bowed, deeper this time. Vivian accepted it with silence. Daniel looked at Ethan mentally. What the hell is going on? Ethan didn't answer immediately. Then, she said she wouldn't come. Now she is here and she didn't even tell us. Daniel shifted slightly, still not moving forward. Still watching. Technically, she didn't tell us anything. We actually hadn't invited her. Daniel could feel Ethan's hesitation. Vivian barely spared him a glance since entering the room, but everything she did screamed purpose. And now, with his entire family humbled, gifted, and quietly stunned, she finally turned to him. Slowly. Precisely. And met his eyes. She lowered her gaze, none of the edge or steel he usually saw. She bowed just slightly. Then she said, soft and composed, "Husband, I am sorry for being late." Then Vivian smiled at him. Just a flicker. Controlled. Elegant. But it hit Daniel like a goddamn manibolt to the chest. His heart didn't just skip, it tripped, stumbled, and almost fell straight out of his ass. Ethan, whispering from somewhere behind his ribs. "She smiled at you. Are you okay?" "No," Daniel thought. "No, I am not." What the actual Margaret Jo clapped her hands lightly. "Everyone, let's eat. Vivian, dear, you must be starving after such a long trip." The attendants scattered like well-trained shadows, and within seconds, the long lacquered table in the east wing had been set. Roasted duck, 8 treasure rice, dumplings arranged in spirals, lotus root, 3 kinds of tea, some of it traditional, some of it suspiciously high-class like someone had whispered the Lee name in the kitchen and the chefs had panicked. Vivian took the seat beside Margaret without protest, not just as a gesture of power, but respect. It was a place of honor. Daniel mechanically took the spot beside her. Across from them sat the twins, Ryan and Claire. Caleb was at the far end, sulking. As soon as Vivian's robes settled around her like silk armor, Margaret began the ritual Chinese mother act with the force of a typhoon. Apparently, Chinese mothers were still Chinese mothers, even in a fantasy world in another dimension. And that thought was freaky, but not entirely unwelcome. "Try this, Vivian." A delicate scoop of fish. And this. It's lotus root with plum blossom honey good for circulation. Oh, and the soup we had it made fresh. They said you like clear broths? Vivian somehow received it all with grace. A nod here. A gentle thank you there. She even raised her chopsticks when prompted. She wasn't performing. She was allowing. Daniel didn't know what to do with that. Claire, across the table, was doing her best imitation of a tree trunk. But the way her smile tightened with each new offering made it obvious. She'd expected attention. Deference, even. But no one had saved her a seat next to Margaret. And no one was asking if she'd tried the duck. "This is awkward," Ethan muttered. "Yeah," Daniel agreed. "Do something," Ethan added. "This feels like a social bloodbath." So Daniel, without overthinking it, leaned slightly forward and said, "Claire, I heard you've been studying the Merchant Guild reforms. What's your take on the new tiered licensing proposal?" It was dry. Academic. Real legislation, but about as exciting as watching a turtle die of old age. Still, Claire's eyes lit up like he'd offered her a lifeline. "Oh, yes, it's fascinating, actually. There's been pressure from the spirit banks to shift how regional influence is calculated." She launched in. Margaret nodded absently. Ryan listened politely. One of the twins yawned. Vivian reached for her tea. Quiet. Composed. And then she spoke, addressing Daniel without looking directly at him. "It's rare," she said smoothly, "for a husband to ignore his wife during a family meal." Daniel blinked. Claire went silent mid-sentence. Caleb's chopsticks paused halfway to his mouth. "Ethan." "Oh my God. What the hell was that?" Vivian finally turned her head, just slightly, and looked at him. That same smile again. Only this time, it had edges. Not hostile, not sarcastic. Just sharp enough to make sure he felt it. Daniel stared at her, caught somewhere between confusion and awe. She was engaging with everyone. Margaret, the girls, Ryan. She'd claimed the room, gifted them into silence, and now she was reminding him that he was the one falling behind. "She's drawing you in," Ethan said, stunned. "She's not just tolerating the role. She's playing it. Perfectly." Daniel turned back toward the table, recentered his posture, and lifted his tea. "Apologies," he said with a slight smile. "I was just overwhelmed. My wife's presence tends to do that." A ripple of laughter. Margaret beamed. Even Vivian's smile twitched just slightly. Claire picked up her teacup and sipped in silence. And across the table, Caleb finally put his chopsticks down. But he didn't speak. Not once. Chapter 28. Vivian. Vivian excused herself with the kind of soft smile that made noblewomen lean closer and servants step aside without question. She stood with grace, made some polite mention of needing the lavatory, and left the Joe family dining room without looking back. Her slippers whispered against the polished stone as she turned the first corner. By the time she passed the hanging lanterns and stepped into the silent corridor outside the east wing, the air shifted, and so did her face. Gone was the practiced composure, the faint smile, the imperial stillness. She leaned against a wooden pillar just past the carved window and exhaled, quiet but sharp. What the hell was that? She pressed a hand to her chest, not because she was in pain, but because she could still feel the aftershocks of the night. Since when did I kneel? Since when did I scrape? Since when did I act like that in front of a man I barely know? A man I don't even like? The Lee heiress did not perform. The Lee heiress expected performance. And yet tonight, she had bowed so deeply her braid brushed the floor. She had handed out gifts like blessings from the heavens. She had smiled at children, thanked servants, let Margaret Jo feed her like a beloved daughter. None of that had been the plan. She had intended to arrive late, just late enough to make a point, just long enough to remind them who she was. But then the path icon footage had resurfaced in her mind. Her father, Ethan, that moment in the grand hall when he'd stood between Zhenhua and Jinshun and declared that the honor of House Lee was his to protect. That she was his to protect. That hadn't been performance. It hadn't been strategy. It had been restraint, grace, power worn with humility. And something inside her had clicked. If he could do that for her, then she could show him the same. But if she was going to do it, she would do it flawlessly. No half measures. No clipped gestures or symbolic bows. She would show respect as if it were a sword drawn not for battle, but for peace. And yet, she dragged a hand down her face. Why did I get snippy when he was talking to the Wang daughter? The question landed like a slap. She had told herself it was about propriety, about appearances, that a husband in front of family should know better than to make his bride invisible. But that voice, too quiet, too honest, rose from the back of her mind like a ghost. If it was just about respect, why did it feel like betrayal? She had said it lightly, of course. It's rare for a husband to ignore his wife at dinner. Just polite enough. Just edged enough to land. But she'd meant it. And she'd meant it personally. He shouldn't have been talking to Claire, she thought again. I'm his wife. He should be paying attention to me. She froze. That thought, raw and reflexive, echoed like thunder in the corridor. What the fuck? She straightened from the pillar, staring at nothing. There it was again. Unbidden. Unsettling. I'm his wife. Politically. Socially. Emotionally. Possessively. The very thing she'd designed the marriage to avoid. Her jaw tightened. She turned abruptly, walking down the corridor with quick, silent steps. Not back to the dining room. Not yet. She needed a moment to collect herself. Or maybe to run from a thought that refused to be buried. Vivian returned to the dining hall composed. No, more than composed, flawless. Every line of her robe refolded. Her expression perfectly blank. The softness that had slipped in earlier was packed away again, sealed behind silk and instinct. She stepped through the threshold like she hadn't just questioned her own sanity. Ethan glanced up as she entered. Their eyes met. He didn't smile, didn't nod, but his posture shifted ever so slightly, as if he'd been watching for her. She moved back to her seat beside Margaret with a faint incline of her head. The table had returned to idle chatter in her absence. Claire's voice was the loudest, making some dry remark about market trends and southern tariffs. No one responded. Vivian allowed herself a breath. Then, a ripple. Not magical. Social. The outer hall murmured with the soft rustle of arrival. Attendants announcing a carriage, doors opening, voices too practiced to be accidental. A servant leaned in and whispered to Margaret, who brightened immediately. Oh, wonderful timing. I was hoping they'd stop by. Vivian didn't ask who they were. She didn't have to wait long. The doors parted like the opening of a stage curtain, and in glided Marissa Lynn, short, glossy-haired, dressed in soft coral robes cinched tightly around a frankly outrageous figure. 18 years old, already the subject of 4 fan-painted path icon scrolls. Breasts far too generous for her frame, hips that swayed with weaponized innocence, and eyes that sparkled like she didn't know she was chaos incarnate. But make no mistake, Vivian didn't underestimate her. Marissa Lynn knew exactly what she was doing. She absolutely knew. Vivian's jaw didn't tighten. Her eyes didn't narrow, but something cold and serpentine coiled low in her spine. The Lynn family entered in practiced formation. Marissa at the center, radiant in soft coral silk, flanked by her parents, Lord and Lady Lynn minor nobles with respectable holdings along the southern border. Their wealth came from ancestral trade routes and seasonal jade exports, but their influence came from proximity. Old Joe blood, tied by shared rights and centuries of politically expedient marriages. This visit was not spontaneous. This had intent. Lord Lynn bowed to Margaret and Robert Joe with the appropriate blend of formality and ease. We're grateful to be received on such short notice. My daughter has been eager to offer her respects. Lady Lynn smiled tightly. It's not every day the Joe sons return with their brides. Her eyes flicked first to Claire, then to Vivian. Evaluating, Claire stood and bowed lightly. Lady Lynn, Lord Lynn, a pleasure. Vivian followed suit, just slightly more precise. Claire was warm. Vivian was flawless. Neither smiled. Marissa, of course, curtsied last. A little deeper than necessary. A little slower. The kind of curtsy meant to catch light and draw eyes. I hope we're not intruding, she said sweetly, her voice bright with unearned innocence. Margaret rose with a practiced smile. Not at all, Marissa dear. We're so pleased you could make it. Come sit. You remember Ethan, don't you? Marissa turned her head with an exaggerated kind of grace and beamed. Marissa practically skipped over, the top of her head barely reaching Ethan's shoulder as she slid into the empty seat at his other side. Ethan straightened just slightly. Marissa, he said calmly. You've grown, she tittered. You always say that. Maybe you just haven't caught up, but... Marissa leaned forward in a very exaggerated way. Vivian picked up her teacup. It didn't rattle. Claire glared, her eyes sharpening like knives. Marissa turned her entire body toward Ethan, one leg crossed over the other in a deliberate show of bounce and angle. And suddenly she was laughing at everything he said, even the things he didn't say. Vivian watched it all with the elegance of a queen watching court jesters perform. Detached, above it, unbothered, until Marissa reached out lightly, fingertips brushing Ethan's sleeve. That's when Vivian set her cup down. Softly. So softly it made more noise than if she'd slammed it. The table quieted for half a second. Marissa blinked. Claire blinked harder. Ethan glanced her way, and Vivian, still smiling, tilted her head just enough to catch his eye. He held her gaze for a breath, then turned back to Marissa. Vivian folded her hands in her lap. She wasn't jealous. Of course not. She was just noticing. That was all. After all, she'd already done more than she should have tonight. And if the little peach blossom with breasts bigger than her ambition thought this was her moment, well, she was wrong. And Vivian would make sure she understood that. Chapter 29. Marissa. Marissa Lynn was glowing. Not figuratively, literally. Her mana aura always shimmered when she was excited, and tonight, it sparkled like lantern light on the lake. Their family carriage curved up the eastern drive of the Joe estate, and she leaned forward against the velvet cushion, clutching her mother's sleeve with both hands like a child on a festival night. Sit properly, her father muttered, not looking up from his schedule crystal. I'm visiting Ethan, she whispered back. That doesn't mean you get to bounce. Yes, it does, she said sweetly. Her mother sighed but smiled. Don't touch your face. You're flushed enough. She ignored the warning and checked her reflection in the mirrored charm embedded in her bracelet. Hair, perfect. Robes tighter than last time. Chest, standing strong. Eyes, wide, glowy, and innocent. It was time. The carriage slowed. Outside, lanterns lined the paths. The manor was lit from within like a jewel box. She could feel the projections already watching path icons, scribbling and whispering and broadcasting little bursts of gossip for the public stream. Good. Let them see. The doors opened. Marissa stepped out like she was descending from the clouds. Her parents followed at a polite distance, offering bows and greetings to the Joe household attendants. She barely noticed. All she saw was the light through the windows and the silhouette of him. Tall, poised, quiet, Ethan Joe. Marissa's heartbeat skipped, then stuttered. Gods, he looked good. Not in the overly polished, court boy kind of way-oiled hair and posturing arrogance, but refined. Calm. Like a lake so deep it reflected the stars. No one else had eyes like his. Not that sharp shade of storm sky blue. Not that voice like warm thunder. And not that quiet restraint that made her want to shatter it. She knew how people looked at her. She knew what her walk did to the boys at the academy. She'd seen the likes, the messages, the scrambled flattery sent through charm interfaces every day. But Ethan had never looked at her like that. He looked at her like she wasn't quite real. That would change tonight. She adjusted her robe's delicate coral silk, embroidered so tightly it hugged every curve, and walked through the main hall like she owned it. The receiving chamber doors parted, and there he was, seated at the table, laughing at something. Laughing. She almost stopped walking. He was even more beautiful than she remembered. And beside him, Vivian Lee, cold, composed, drenched in elegance, looking like a statue someone prayed to and then regretted it. Marissa felt something twist. Vivian Lee had once been her idol, one of the four great beauties, the Crane of House Lee, untouchable. But she had taken him. No worse, she had married him, and barely even looked at him like he mattered. Marissa watched her for half a second too long, then dropped her gaze, put on her brightest smile, and floated forward with a bow so perfect it hurt to execute. "I hope we're not intruding," she said. Margaret Jo smiled and welcomed her in. A seat was offered beside Ethan. She didn't hesitate. And when she turned her head to face him, tilting her shoulder just so, chest forward just enough, she smiled like she hadn't spent the last 2 years dreaming of this moment. "Marissa," he said calmly, "you've grown." His eyes flicked toward her. And for one instant, one breath, he smiled. Marissa's whole body went warm. She didn't care that Vivian was sitting right there. She didn't care that Claire Wang was down the table looking like someone had stepped on her name day gift. She didn't even care that Caleb Joe looked like he wanted to throw something. Let them. Marissa Lynn was done waiting. And tonight, she was going to begin her ascent. Marissa settled into her seat like the queen she was. She didn't care that Ethan was married. She didn't care that Vivian was one of the four beauties. She was a queen way more than Vivian ever would be. She belonged at that table. She would make sure they all understood that. Her family had been close to the Joe estate for generations, distant cousins, through some marriage line no one bothered to remember. She'd visited this estate since she was old enough to chase koi through the side pond. She knew the walls, the layout, the rhythm of the servants, even which tea sets Margaret Jo liked best. This wasn't intrusion. It was return. She leaned just a little toward Ethan. Not touching, not too obvious. Just close enough that if he turned his head, their shoulders might brush. "You've really changed," she said in a low voice, soft enough that no one else could catch it. "I mean it. You used to walk around with ink stains on your hands and forget to comb your hair." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "That was a long time ago." "It wasn't that long ago. Besides, I remember everything," she said. "Especially where you are concerned." He gave the smallest of nods and turned back toward the table. Marissa followed with a sip of tea and a smile. She could feel the eyes. Claire's, Caleb's, and yes, most deliciously Vivian's. The silence was always the loudest part. Marissa smiled faintly, swirling her tea. "My father says the capital's gone mad over those reform decrees. Everyone wants bloodline stabilization clauses added into the marriage codes. Probably because half the empire is trying to marry into rare inheritance lines," Ethan replied evenly. "Some families are claiming their bloodlines shifted immediately after sealing. The Lings reported an evolution last season. They say it's tied to the new sealing rite." She tilted her head, lips curving. "I heard. Miranda Ling supposedly developed a flame affinity that's almost identical to Darren's flame embodiment. Imperial monitors are calling it a breakthrough. Instant compatibility. Instant potential. It's practically bloodline alchemy." "More like selective cultivation," Ethan said. "But yes, a preview." Marissa's eyes sparkled. "Some of those bloodlines are very tempting." His gaze flicked toward her again. She felt it land. Success. But then, Vivian Lee set down her teacup. The sound was soft. Too soft. Like a threat wearing perfume. For the first time, Marissa dared a glance across the table. Vivian met her eyes. No smile, no coldness. Just stillness. Like an archer notched but not drawn. Marissa's stomach flipped. That wasn't supposed to happen. Vivian was supposed to be bored. Detached. Above all this. Instead, she looked like she was measuring her. Marissa tilted her chin and smiled sweetly. "Lady Lee, you're even more beautiful in person. I almost didn't recognize you without your veil." Vivian blinked once. Marissa felt the temperature drop 2 degrees. Then, gracefully, with a diplomat's poise, Vivian inclined her head. "The path icons always edit their projections," she said. "Reality tends to be sharper." Marissa kept smiling. Barely. The conversation at the table resumed, but suddenly it felt like walking through a garden filled with traps. The smiles, the laughter, the politeness, all there. But so were the eyes. Ethan was watching both of them now, a bit of bewilderment on his face. Claire looked like she wanted to vanish. And Vivian? Vivian took another bite of lotus root with the indifference of a woman who could have the table flipped and still come out looking clean. Marissa straightened. Fine. So Vivian had decided to play. So had she. This wasn't over. This was the opening move. Chapter 30, Claire. Claire sipped her tea with perfect grace. She kept her spine straight, her eyes attentive, her mouth poised in a smile that had won over ministers and mothers alike. But inside, she was unraveling. Across the table, Caleb sat in moody silence. Not unusual. He wore sulking like a second skin. But tonight, he wasn't sulking at her. He wasn't glaring at Ethan either. He was watching Vivian. Furtive glances. Quick and guilty. Not desire, not exactly something meaner. Like envy, bottled and sweetened for court. Claire hated it. Vivian had walked in and owned the room. Of course she had. That robe alone probably cost more than the Joe Estate's annual tribute. Every movement was measured, every word shaped like a blade in velvet. But she was Caleb's sister-in-law. Why was he looking at her like that? Then again, she thought bitterly, Caleb never had much discipline when it came to what wasn't his. Still, what scraped her raw tonight wasn't Caleb's wandering attention. It was Ethan's. She'd been talking to him. Really talking for the first time in what felt like lifetimes. She brought up something that actually mattered to her. Merchant guild reforms, tiered licensing, enforcement clauses. Dry to some, not to him. Or at least, not to the Ethan she used to know. And for a moment, just a breath of one, he was there again. The way he used to be. Bright, sharp-eyed, quietly intense. The kind of man who listened so fully it made you feel smarter just for speaking. She'd leaned in. Not physically, emotionally. Then Vivian spoke. Just one line, light as air. Ethan turned. Claire felt the temperature in her chest drop. Then, like fate twisting the knife, in came Marissa Lynn. And the rest of the table seemed to forget Claire existed. Marissa was exactly the kind of girl who made headlines in Path Icon reels. Just 18, built like a goddess drawn by a drunk artist. Exaggerated in all the right places and barely aware of how dangerous she looked. Or maybe too aware. She bounced. She laughed. She brushed Ethan's sleeve like she owned his affection. And Ethan, he didn't pull away. He didn't lean in either. Typical Ethan. Measured. Polite. But then again, his eyes did flicker to her chest. Claire felt something sting beneath her ribs. She forced a smile. She had no right to be upset. No right to feel anything at all. But lately the dreams had been getting worse. She didn't know if worse was the right word. But they were stronger. Deeper. Always the same feeling like being wrapped in warmth just beyond the firelight. A presence. Tall. Quiet. Steady. Watching her. Protecting her. Sometimes there were fragments. A pale blue glow. The feel of hands catching her as she fell. A voice low, calm, and familiar in a way that didn't make sense. She never saw his face, but she knew it was him. Every time she woke from those dreams, her pulse was racing. Her throat tight. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a truth she didn't want to name. It wasn't Caleb. It never had been. It was Ethan. Don't be ridiculous, she told herself. Dreams mean nothing. But dreams didn't make your breath catch at the sound of a voice. Dreams didn't twist your stomach when someone else laughed at his joke. Dreams didn't make you jealous. She clenched her jaw, stared at the tea in her cup, and forced herself to breathe. He's not your boyfriend, she reminded herself brutally. He's your husband's brother. And no matter what dream said, no matter what memory whispered, that made all the difference. Claire smoothed her robe and placed her teacup on the saucer with delicate finality. She had to leave. Not dramatically, not hastily, just quietly, gracefully, the way women like her did when they'd overstayed dignity's welcome. Everything about the evening had shifted. Vivian was glowing beneath the polished mask of nobility, basking in the attention of Ethan's mother like she'd always belonged. Marissa had turned the dining table into her personal stage, all bouncing charm and flattering gasps. And Ethan, He sat there, still and steady, as if none of it surprised him, as if none of it bothered him, as if she weren't even there. Claire angled slightly toward Margaret Jo, preparing to offer a polite smile and some excuse about needing to check on a servant or send a message home. But Caleb spoke first, loud enough to make everyone pause. "Marissa," he said, his voice low and smooth. "It's been a long time since I visited your family estate. Perhaps I could stop by during next season's Bloom Week? I remember you always hosted an excellent evening procession." Claire froze. Not because he'd spoken, but because of how he said it. Too confident. Too familiar. The kind of voice that wanted everyone at the table to hear. Marissa blinked, smiled, and completely changed temperature. "Oh," she said sweetly. "I don't think that's necessary. Our guest list has been a bit selective lately." The room went quiet. Then Vivian, without looking up from her chopsticks, murmured, "Ah, the value of discernment." Claire couldn't decide if she wanted to laugh or scream. Caleb looked like he'd swallowed a live coal. But Marissa, never missing a beat, turned back toward Ethan, and batted her lashes with a force that should have been classified as an arcane technique. "Actually," she said brightly, "Ethan, you studied at the academy longer than anyone expected, didn't you? I heard your research into legacy-bound constructs was so advanced the elders tried to seal your notes." Claire's heart skipped. She remembered that. She'd read those notes, helped him organize them. Ethan didn't even blink. That was a long time ago. "But still," Marissa pressed, "you were always so brilliant with energy harmonics. Would you consider visiting the academy sometime? Maybe giving a short lecture to the advanced class? Even just a demonstration." Claire waited for him to deflect, to change the subject, to show some humility, to look at her. Instead, Ethan nodded once. Calm, polite. "If the headmaster approves, I'd be happy to." Claire felt the breath leave her chest. He wasn't hers, not in any way that mattered. And it didn't matter how many papers they'd written together, how many nights they'd shared tangled in thought and maybe more. It didn't matter if she dreamed of him or remembered the exact weight of his laugh in her hands. He had moved on. And now, apparently, so had she. Claire rose with perfect poise. "I should return to the guest quarters," she said to no one in particular. "It's been a long day." Margaret gave her a warm smile and patted her hand. No one else stopped her. No one asked her to stay. She didn't look back. Not at Ethan. Not at Marissa. And certainly not at Caleb.
Chapter 31, Daniel. The walk back to the guest suite was quiet. Not the cold silence of strangers, nor the brittle silence after a fight. No, this was the thick waiting quiet of two people, pretending they didn't feel anything, just to see if the other would blink first. Daniel opened the screen door and gestured her in. Vivian entered like she was being announced. Her robes moved like water. Her posture hadn't shifted once since they left the dining room. If she was tired, she didn't show it. If she was rattled, she wouldn't let it surface. He closed the door behind them and leaned back against it. The lights in the suite were low and warm. Outside, a breeze whispered across the balcony, fluttering the curtains. "I think you have some explaining to do," he said, breaking the stillness. Vivian made a quiet sound, neither yes nor no, and moved toward the tea table, fingertips tracing the edge of the lacquered surface. Her shoulders were back, head high. "A queen in exile." Daniel gestured around them. "If this is your version of non-entanglement," he said dryly, "you might want to revisit the definition." Vivian glanced at him, unimpressed. "I fulfilled my obligation." "Is that what that was?" he asked. "Obligation?" She folded her arms. You knelt before my father." "I protected your name," Daniel said. "I made sure you weren't embarrassed in front of the entire empire. It was necessary. I've explained this. And I bowed to your parents, presented gifts, smiled at your sisters, ate Margaret Jo's dumplings, and pretended not to notice Claire staring at me like she wanted to spit fire. I did what I needed to do." Daniel's smile twitched. "So you were trying to balance the scales, make us even." "No, I wasn't thinking about it like that." "You didn't have to come," he said, voice softening. "Yeah, you told me you wouldn't." Vivian's eyes flicked toward him. "You never actually asked. You just assumed I wouldn't. We both know that was a reasonable assumption." "Well, you changed the rules when you knelt to save Jun." Daniel shrugged. "Someone had to stop him from turning the ceremony into a disaster. If I hadn't stepped in, your father would have executed him, and your relationship wouldn't have survived the blow. and someone had to make sure your family and all the Path iconics watching like hawks didn't think I was a cold-hearted hag. Daniel tilted his head. Are you saying you care what people think? I care about outcomes, she said quickly. Same thing, he replied. You're overthinking it. You're under-explaining it. She looked away out toward the moonlit courtyard. Her profile caught the glow of the lantern, and for a moment, she looked like something painted in ink and glass. You said you didn't want a husband, he said, his voice going low. Didn't want closeness. That this was just a political arrangement. Yes, I did, she said quietly. And yet, tonight. He took a step closer, not threatening, not even intentional, just drawn. You didn't just show up. You bowed. You brought gifts tailored to my siblings' personalities. You let my mother serve you with chopsticks. You made my brother stammer like a drunken sailor. Vivian's expression remained flat. I was polite. I was proper. You were brilliant, Daniel said. You were bloody perfect. Beautiful. Serene. A God's damn vision. That wasn't politeness. That was full-on theater. She turned toward him. So what, Ethan? You want me to apologize for being effective? No, he said. I want to understand what the hell is happening. A pause. Long. Waited. She spoke first. You threw everything off balance when you knelt. When you saved my friend, no one else would have done that. No one else would even consider doing that. Daniel shook his head. It's not that big a deal. I stabilized the situation. You lowered yourself. Daniel raised an eyebrow. He repeated, Is that what you call it? To the outside world, she said. Yes. And what do you call what you did tonight? Vivian hesitated. Daniel waited. Finally, she said, A response. An appropriate reaction to your action. That's not how you respond to something you don't care about, he said, stepping in close now. Their eyes met. Quiet. Hot. Sharp. Vivian's voice dropped half a tone. You're impossible, Daniel smiled faintly. I'm practical. You think you're clever. Why are we citing facts we already know? You're aggravating. You're just upset you can't flash that gorgeous face of yours and have me back down. That stopped her, just for a second. Her lips parted like she'd been planning to say something else, and it slipped. Then she said, quieter now. What do you want from me, Ethan? Nothing you don't want to give, he said. I'm just trying to understand. Because nothing about your behavior tonight seems logical. And honestly, if we're going to be stuck in this, I'd rather we both stop pretending we're statues. You think I'm pretending? I think the Ice Queen might be warmer than people think. She didn't answer that. Not because he was wrong, but because he wasn't. A silence stretched. And just as something might have cracked open, just as Daniel saw her shoulders shift, her gaze soften. A knock. Brother Ethan? Ryan's voice muffled through the door. Vivian stepped back faster than she should have. Daniel exhaled and called out, Come in. She retreated toward the shadows of the inner room. Not hiding, just withdrawing. Rebuilding her walls. Ryan entered, scroll clutched in hand, eyes bouncing between them like a kid, walking into the middle of a storm that had just decided to behave. Sorry, he said. I didn't know if now was a bad time. It's fine, little brother. What's up? Daniel took the scroll from Ryan's hands. Why are you already working on compression arrays? He asked, brow raised. No, you just got the technique. Ryan hesitated, then squared his shoulders. I've already learned it, Daniel blinked. Ryan continued, voice low but certain. It's clean, but slow. I'm trying to trim the casting time. If you can't fire it faster than a standard spirit technique, what's the point? Daniel stared at him. So did Vivian. Her eyes narrowed, not critically, but curiously. That didn't surprise Daniel. Ryan had always been like this. Quiet. Precise. Annoyingly fast when it came to anything martial. His instinct for technique optimization was practically reflexive. Daniel unrolled the scroll. The glyphs shimmered faintly silver loops in a tight compression weave. Elegant at a glance, but flawed at the junctions. Beautiful, but broken. He was halfway through the first node when he realized Ryan wasn't even looking at it. He was staring at the floor, hands clenched, posture wound tight. Daniel looked up. All right, this isn't about the scroll, is it? Ryan opened his mouth, closed it, then blurted out, It's about Lily. Vivian turned her head slightly. She didn't interrupt, but she was listening now. Daniel leaned back. Go on. Ryan ran a hand through his hair. She's amazing, not just pretty, brilliant, kind. Talks to me like I matter. She's from a noble family? Ryan nodded. Tier 3, branch line. Technically slightly above us, but not politically aggressive. Old bloodline. Quiet rep. We met in the archive wing. She laughed at my notes. Daniel smiled. And? We started talking, walking together. She lets me carry her satchel sometimes. He paused. We held hands once. Vivian blinked slowly, caught between a smirk and a sigh. Daniel kept his tone light. So what's the problem? Ryan's face darkened. Jinhai. The name had weight. His dad's a senior arbiter in the Commerce Tribunal, Ryan said. Untouchable. Jinhai acts like he owns the campus, especially Lily. Daniel's jaw tightened. What kind of behavior? Ryan's voice dropped. He bullies her. Says things like, how graceful, or, you look better without that cloak. But when no one's looking, he gets close. Too close. Last week I found him cornering her behind the garden wall. Vivian's fingers tensed in her lap. Daniel didn't move. What happened? I hit him, Ryan said. No magic. Though I should hit him with magic, the bastard. Just straight to the mouth. He dropped like a sack of grain. He paused. I may have kicked him once or twice. Daniel grinned. Good. That's my little brother. Ryan blinked. What, you're not mad? Of course not, Daniel repeated. You did what you were supposed to. You don't put up with that shit ever. Brother, how can you say that? I'm going to ruin everything, Ryan said, panic rising. Jinhai's threatening to file a report. His parents are involved. Lily's terrified. If this gets back to Mom and Dad... Ryan looked down at his hands. They've worked so hard to rebuild this house. I don't want to be the one who cracks it. Daniel gently rolled the scroll closed. You didn't crack anything, he said. You protected someone. That's not shameful. But your mistake, Daniel said, was thinking the truth speaks for itself. If anything like this happens again, you come to me immediately, understand? Ryan went still, then nodded. Yes, brother. Daniel stood, moved around the table. No, you did the right thing. Now we need to be smart. We'll talk to Lily. Prepare a witness statement. Get ahead of this before his family spins it. Ryan looked at him like he was seeing him for the first time. You're not alone in this, Daniel said. Not anymore, Ryan sagged. Oh, thank you. Vivian stood and appeared to be messaging on her crystal. Daniel turned, expecting sarcasm. Instead, you're good with him. But, dear husband, you don't need to do any of that. Don't forget who you're married to. Then her face changed. Not cold, not poised, just still, and angry. Really angry. I want to make sure I understand, she said, addressing Ryan directly. Did my brother-in-law just say a girl he cares about was assaulted? Her voice was perfectly level. Terrifying. Ryan froze, but spoke slowly. Yes, Vivian stepped forward. And the boy who did it? Jinhai, Ryan whispered. Son of Arbiter Wei. Vivian's eyes narrowed. Daniel had never seen her like this. She turned toward the archway. May. The aide appeared instantly, already alert. Vivian didn't look away. Tell May everything you know about them. Ryan blinked. What? Vivian crouched, just enough to meet his eyes. Not kneeling. I need to know who they are, she said, so I can make sure they never mistake you or Lily for someone unprotected again. Ryan nodded. He spoke quickly names, alliances, influence threads. Vivian listened. Every word. Then she straightened. May, she said, voice like cut glass. I want everything. Their holdings, their allies, contracts, who they trade with, who they owe, what they've buried, now. May bowed and vanished. Yes, my lady. Vivian turned back to Ryan. If I hear, she said, that he approaches either of you again, if Lily is pressured, if your name is threatened, I will attend to it personally. No need to be afraid. Ryan opened his mouth. No words came. Vivian continued, giving him a slight smile. No one lays a hand on what's mine. She turned to Daniel. And that includes my little brother-in-law. Daniel didn't speak, but something in his chest shifted. Slow, strange, warm. She hadn't said it to win him. She'd said it because she meant it. And in that moment, he realized Vivian Lee wasn't just playing her role. She had just claimed it. Chapter 32, Ryan Joe. Ryan sat on the balcony just outside the guest suites, the wood still warm from the sun. A soft breeze stirred the wind chimes overhead, quiet and precise, like someone had tuned them with a fork instead of fingers. Moonlight filtered through the garden trees in silver threads. He leaned back against the post and exhaled slowly. Everything was still. Everything except his pulse. He kept replaying the scene in his head. Vivian Lee, coldest woman in the capital, daughter of House Lee, heir to a bloodline that could crack mountains, had stood up. Not just for Ethan, for him. He hadn't even meant to talk about Lily. He just wanted help with the scroll. That was it. A quiet conversation. A bit of advice. Something to ease the swirl of frustration he'd been carrying since the punch landed square across Jinhai's smug face. But when it came out, when the words slipped past his mouth and hit the air, everything had changed. Vivian had moved like a drawn blade. She didn't shout. She just moved. She'd summoned May, eyes sharp as frost, and ordered a full background report on the Wei family patriarch and holdings. She told him Jinhai would never get near him again. That Lily would be protected. And she meant it. He hadn't believed it. Not entirely. Not until now. The message crystal in his hand buzzed 3 short pulses. It glowed faintly with muted golden light, the signal weak but steady. The older interface clicked as it warmed. Mana threads humming softly. He still remembered the day he'd been gifted it, his 5th birthday. One of his father's cheaper practical tokens. Functional. Durable. Not like Ethan's sleek Imperial tier crystal. Then again, Ryan wasn't married to the heir of a tier 1 family. So small. Don't sweat the small things. Still, his crystal, though older, had never let him down. He tapped it once and pressed it to his ear. Lily's voice came through, soft, disbelieving, a little breathless. Ryan, what did you do? He blinked. The message kept playing. I mean, thank you. But also, what did you do? My grandfather just got a call. He was totally bewildered. He got a direct message from Jinhai's grandfather, the patriarch of the Wei. Ryan's stomach dropped. A what? Can you believe that? A direct call. He apologized for Jinhai's lack of discipline and offered to send a gift. I don't know what kind, but it involved spirit-grade rice wine and apology coins with formal seals. Ryan's mouth opened, but nothing came out. She kept going. They're pulling Jinhai out of school. A stunned silence. Not just suspended. Gone. Immediate leave? They said it's for reputation recalibration and spiritual realignment. Apparently, he's being shipped off to a remote regional campus. Ryan still didn't know what to say. He's being carted off by sunrise. He's not even allowed to say goodbye. Ryan stared at the crystal. The message wasn't done. Ryan, what happened? Did your family always have that much influence? You didn't do anything illegal, did you? Because I'm not worth all that. There was a pause. Then her voice softened. Whatever it was. Thank you. The message ended. Ryan just sat there. He looked down at the charm in his hand. The weight of it felt different now, heavier. Not because the news was bad, but because he'd never seen things move like this. Not for someone like him. He was a nobody. When people like Jinhai crossed lines, there were meetings, complaints, slow, grinding bureaucracy that eventually forgot you existed. This was different. This was decisive use of power that he could barely understand. Power had moved for him. Or rather, someone had made it move. Ryan sat at the edge of the low balcony rail, the night air cool against his skin, his fingers still curled around the old charm crystal. The faint glow had faded minutes ago, but the weight of Lily's voice lingered like a cord still vibrating through his chest. She'd thanked him. She cared. He should have been ecstatic, and he was... But instead of thinking about Lily, he found himself staring at the soft-lit curtain of the guest suite behind him, and considering about Ethan. He was different now. Less cold, more smiles, more present, like something had sharpened behind his eyes, like the quiet brother Ryan used to tiptoe around had suddenly decided to stop waiting for permission to speak. He still didn't take up space the way Caleb did, didn't charm, didn't push, didn't brag. But now when Ethan walked into a room, people noticed even without him trying. He spoke more now with a dry sort of humor, and everything he said landed. His words had weight. His posture had steel. And the calm, odd brother Ryan remembered from childhood, the one always lost in theories and strange constructs, now moved through the world like he'd started seeing it from above. It used to be Caleb who mattered. Caleb was loud, flashy, and charismatic. He walked into rooms like parties had been waiting for him. And more often than not, they had. He made people laugh. He made people nervous. He had presence. He was also pretty good with a sword, at least for their little part of the world. And yeah, Ryan had admired that. But Caleb was also selfish, arrogant, obsessed with being right, even when he was obviously wrong. If you weren't useful to Caleb, you were invisible. If you got in his way, you were a problem. Ethan had been the opposite. Quiet, awkward, distant sometimes, but brilliant in a way that didn't show itself at first. He would sit for hours at a table, sketching theory diagrams or scribbling strange manuscripts that looked like nothing. Until they changed everything. Ryan remembered one night clearly, he must have been 9, maybe 10, when he'd snuck into Ethan's room after a storm had knocked out the estate's external wards. Ethan had been at his desk, half asleep and surrounded by notes and diagrams. Instead of sending Ryan away, he let him stay, handed him a snack, and kept working on what Ryan thought was some kind of magical math problem. It wasn't. It was a prototype for the medicine that would later save the Lee family matriarch's life. The same medicine that restored her cultivation foundation and reversed the degeneration in her spiritual core. Their parents hadn't even known Ethan was working on it. No one had. He didn't tell anyone. Not until it was done. And even then, he didn't brag, didn't market it, didn't monetize it. He just moved on. Like it had been the obvious thing to do. Ryan had watched the world scramble around rumors. The most powerful family in the empire owed Ethan a life debt. It was never confirmed. The Lee family didn't speak. Ethan didn't speak. It didn't matter. Their entire political standing shifted. And Ethan? He just asked for more paper when a turtle. Why a turtle? Ryan still had no idea. Back then, he hadn't really understood the implications, just that there were more servants, more clout. The turtle mattered. Back then, he hadn't seen it for what it was. But now he did. That had been the turning point in Ethan's narrative. The moment he shifted from forgotten son to something else, something important. Ryan had always assumed Caleb was the one who made the family proud. Caleb was the one who acted. Ethan was just there. But now he wasn't so sure. Ryan looked up at the sky, the stars laced with moonlight and possibility. It was time to stop looking at Ethan like he was the quiet one in the corner. Maybe it was time to start seeing him for what he was. The storm that had been sitting still this whole time waiting. Ryan turned his head back toward the suite. Vivian Lee, his sister-in-law, which still felt surreal, was probably in there with Ethan. Maybe they were reading in silence. Maybe they were arguing in low, knife-sharp whispers like they did at dinner. Or maybe Ethan was in there inventing something no one had ever imagined. A spell, a medicine, a breakthrough in mana pattern theory that would shift cultivation itself for generations. He didn't know, but he knew this. The world he thought he lived in, the one where power meant intimidation, where bullies always won, where boys like him were supposed to swallow their anger, while girls like Lily cried behind garden walls. That world was gone, because someone had decided to fight with him, and that someone was his second brother, and his unbelievably terrifying, unbelievably beautiful wife.
Chapter 33, Vivian. The dining hall had changed. Not in shape, not in size, but in texture, in tension. The formal banners were gone. The projection sphere had dimmed. Even the servants moved differently, now quieter, faster, as if they were avoiding interrupting something fragile. Margaret Jo had insisted on hosting evening tea after dinner. For digestion, she'd said, and to keep good company from vanishing too fast. Vivian, to her own mild surprise, hadn't argued. Now she sat near the far end of the long table, shoulders relaxed for the first time in hours, her cup resting between her palms. The tea was a blend of plum leaf and snow fennel light. Clear, slightly bitter. She liked it more than she should have. Across from her, Marissa Lynn was still here. Apparently, she was staying with the twins for a few days. Vivian wasn't sure whether that was true or just convenient. Either way, Marissa had clearly made herself comfortable, half-perched on the edge of her seat, wide-eyed, breathless, and entirely too amused by everything Ethan said. Claire sat 2 seats down, quiet and unreadable. Caleb leaned back with his usual confident sprawl, sipping wine as though his family's fortune hadn't been built on propriety. And beside Vivian, Ethan, her husband, still too quiet, still too controlled. Still, hers? No, not really. But his presence had weight now. People were noticing it. She was noticing it. He spoke only when prompted, but every time he did, the room followed. Right now, he was listening to one of the twins recount an alchemical mishap involving too much iron root and an unstable condensation array. I told her not to use the silver basin, Ryan muttered, nudging Emily. She used the silver basin. Because you didn't label the other one, Emily fired back, mock-offended. It looked clean. Ethan smiled faintly. Silver amplifies conductive matrices. It wouldn't have held. I know that now, Emily muttered. Marissa giggled. Caleb looked bored. Claire just smiled, as did their mother. Vivian sipped her tea, watching the dynamic unfold. She was used to being on the outside of family tables, an honored guest or a silent heir. A symbol, not a participant. But here the air was warmer. She didn't understand why that made her uncomfortable. It shouldn't matter. Then she heard it. Ethan's voice, low and precise. Your resonance curve is stabilizing, he said to Ryan. That's why your techniques are cleaner. The Joe bloodline has always had a higher resistance threshold. It adapts slowly, but once a channel's been reinforced, it rarely weakens. Vivian blinked. Bloodline? Always? She asked, setting down her cup. Ethan looked at her, calm and steady. Since we started keeping records. She tilted her head. What is your family's inheritance, exactly? That question paused the table. Not entirely, but the air shifted, like a breeze pulling back before the leaves fell. Ryan glanced at Ethan. Claire looked up, suddenly attentive. Caleb raised a brow. You've never heard? I've heard a dozen theories, Vivian replied. None of them consistent, none documented, and none particularly complete. Margaret shifted. We've never really defined it, to be honest. It's not like most bloodlines. We don't have a technique inheritance or an elemental trait. Just strength, Caleb offered. And durability, Ryan added more softly. Ethan leaned back in his chair, folding his hands loosely around his cup. It's not flashy, but it's foundational. Vivian's eyes narrowed slightly. Explain. Ethan gestured toward the open scrolls on the table. The Joe bloodline doesn't give us a flashy affinity or a signature technique. It gives us structure, internal stability. Our mana is unusually pure, almost no fragmentation, even under stress. Our meridians self-correct faster, and our resistance to corruption and mana poisoning is absurd. Vivian raised an eyebrow. Is that why you didn't break under Nathan's onslaught, despite sloshing your mana around like a drunken sailor? Ethan gave a dry smile. I was demonstrating resilience. You were bleeding on the floor. Wife? Ethan said slowly. Did you just crack a joke? Vivian flushed. Ever so slightly. I joke sometimes. Since when? She didn't answer. Instead, she tapped her fingertip against the rim of her cup. She picked back up the conversation. And you've tested this? Compared it to other families? No formal trials, Claire offered. We've had healers comment on it. A few instructors noticed Ethan could hold pressure longer than others, but that was never written down. Just family talk. Vivian frowned. So no one studied it. No one's tried to understand it. We've never needed to, Caleb said with a shrug. It works. That doesn't make it wise, she said coolly. Ethan's voice slipped beneath hers. Calm, not defensive. It's not that we avoided research. The results never told us anything new. The bloodline strengthens slowly. It doesn't present all at once. We don't get a spark of flame or a blade of light. We just don't break. Vivian went still for a moment, then murmured, You've inherited purity, not performance. Ethan nodded. Yes. That's incredibly rare. Which is why we've never been targeted for it, Emily added, now thoughtful. No one sees a weapon. They just see another house with good control. But compatibility, Vivian said, must be extraordinary. Ethan's mouth curved faintly. I've suspected the same. Vivian stared at him. For the first time that evening, she forgot about Marissa, forgot about Caleb, forgot about posturing. She was simply curious. Why hasn't anyone studied this properly? Why hasn't anyone published it? Out loud, she asked, Has anyone tested your family under pressure? Stress fractures? Sustained overdraw? Compression cycle limits? Caleb blinked. No? We get nosebleeds, Ryan offered. Vivian ignored them. She looked at Ethan and saw something shift in his eyes. What about mana exchange? Purification loops? If your bloodline is inherently stable, your body should be able to absorb foreign mana more cleanly than average. Oh, Ryan said. No one's ever. He means no. Ethan cut in gently. We've never qualitatively tested it. Vivian's eyes didn't move. That should be tested. Claire was watching her now, curiosity overtaking caution. You're taking this very seriously. I take any unclassified bloodline seriously, Vivian replied, but especially one that's been functioning at this level, unnoticed for generations. She turned back to Ethan. You said your records go back how far? 9 generations, he replied. Maybe 10. Some were oral, others burned in the Blackwood fires. No formal inheritance ceremonies? None that survived. Vivian's brow furrowed. But your strength increases over time? Ethan nodded, slowly, consistently. And your cultivation progress isn't hindered? On the contrary, it compounds. The longer we cultivate, the cleaner our base becomes. Vivian leaned forward slightly, intrigued despite herself. So you don't gain power through breakthrough spikes. You layer, like calluses. Exactly, Ethan said. Layered refinement. It's why most of us appear slow in early stages. But once we stabilize... Ryan cut in, suddenly. You can't knock us down. Caleb chuckled faintly. Or if you do, you'll wish you hadn't. Vivian's gaze didn't move from Ethan. And this is instinctive? No rituals. No awakenings. No branded seals, Ethan said. It just is. We're born with it. That's not a bloodline, Vivian said softly. That's an evolutionary trait. The table went quiet. She hadn't meant to sound dramatic, but it landed that way. Marissa, of all people, was the first to break the silence. Wait, like survival pressure? Vivian nodded slowly. Inherited resilience, a passive magic system shaped not by technique, but by necessity. Ryan blinked. That's kind of terrifying. It's kind of brilliant, Vivian said. Caleb arched a brow. So what? We're not some lost magical dynasty, we're just too stubborn to die? Vivian's lips quirked. Essentially. Ethan chuckled under his breath. Vivian turned to him again. You've thought about this. Of course. And? He folded his hands. I've had theories, but no one ever took them seriously. I do. That stopped him. Not dramatically, but it stopped him. Their eyes met. The table faded. I take you seriously, she repeated. Even if you don't. He didn't respond right away, but something in the air shifted. Just a fraction. The flicker of recognition of someone being seen. Margaret Jo, bless her timing, chose that moment to refill everyone's cups and break the tension with a warm, "Shall we discuss what this means for future generations?" Claire snorted. You mean matchmaking? Observation partnerships, Margaret corrected with mock formality. Marissa perked up instantly. Wait, are you saying I could help test the Jo bloodline? No, came Vivian's voice, smooth, decisive. Everyone turned. Vivian didn't smile. We're still assessing compatibility. Marissa's eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't argue. Instead, she leaned back with a faux innocent shrug. Well, I'm very compatible with research, depending on who is conducting it. Vivian looked at her for a long moment, then turned back to Ethan. Have you mapped your meridians lately? I recalibrated them last week. With external interference? No. Would you? Ethan's gaze didn't waver. If you're asking, sure. Vivian's pulse fluttered. She didn't show it, but something in her spine straightened. And suddenly, the warmth in the tea, the soft candlelight, the absurd conversation swirling around the table, it all faded, because for the first time in a very long time, she wasn't looking at a pawn. She was looking at a partner.
Chapter 34, Daniel. They stayed 2 more days. They probably should have left earlier. They both had things to do, but somehow it didn't feel wrong to stay. Vivian and Daniel still separate beds, still sharp edges, but the awkwardness had faded. Their silence was less brittle. Their interactions less guarded. No fights, no speeches, just a kind of coexistence. At night, the guest suite was quiet. One bed near the window, one against the wall. They never spoke after lights out, but sometimes Daniel heard her breathing, shift, slow, steady, safe. That felt like something. Vivian didn't vanish in the mornings like she usually did. She took tea with his mother, walked with the twins in the garden. She didn't laugh, but she smiled more. Enough that Margaret Jo began making plans she never said aloud. By the second evening, Emily and Elise had braided tiny spirit charms into Vivian's hair and called it a Leju Unity ritual. Vivian hadn't stopped them. She'd even let them adjust the placement. Twice. Ryan asked for feedback on his training stances, and Vivian offered it without sarcasm. She corrected his heel pivot, realigned his grip, and nodded once when he got it right. Good, she said. Do it again. And he did. 3 times. Without stopping. Margaret insisted on teaching her the family dumpling fold, and Vivian didn't say no. Her folds weren't perfect, but she memorized the pattern. And when Margaret wasn't looking, she redid the worst one. By the time the departure carriage arrived, the farewell felt like a quiet festival. The twins ambushed her first. Emily hugged her so hard she nearly dropped her travel satchel. Elise slipped a folded talisman into her palm and whispered, "It's good luck for exams or enemies, whichever shows up first." Vivian blinked, then tucked it into her sleeve without a word. Margaret waited at the foot of the steps. When Vivian stepped forward, she pulled her in. A real embrace. Both arms. No hesitation. I expect to see you at winter bloom, she said. If I'm not in seclusion, Margaret smiled faintly. Then I'll wait for spring. Ryan was next. He stood a little straighter than usual, hands tucked behind his back like a soldier trying not to fidget. When she turned toward him, he saluted. It was either ironic or playfully. It was earnest. Thank you, he said. For everything. Vivian looked at him for a moment, then reached forward and flicked the edge of his jacket. Don't thank me until I meet Lily. Ryan blinked. You? Want to? I want to make sure she deserves you, Vivian said, and that she's smart enough to see what she has. Ryan flushed a deep crimson. Also, she added lightly, I want to hear her version of the garden incident, in detail. Daniel, standing nearby, grinned. You're enjoying this. Vivian didn't answer. She turned back toward the carriage. One last glance at the Joe family. Then to Daniel. He didn't say anything at first, just held the door open. She paused. Not inside yet. Not gone. Claire and Caleb were already gone by then. Left early, before breakfast, before anyone could ask questions. Claire hadn't left a note. Caleb had. One line, neatly scrawled, family obligations call. Thanks for the tea. No one said much about it. The carriage swayed gently beneath them as it cut through the veil of evening clouds. Outside, the sky faded from gold to gray, the kind of soft, hazy dusk that made the world feel half-remembered. Inside, the silence was warm. A bit heavy, but it wasn't overbearing either. It was quiet, peaceful. Vivian sat across from him, legs crossed, arms resting loosely in her lap. Light filtered through the charm glass window, catching the edge of her braid. The jade pins shimmered like starlight. They hadn't spoken since leaving the Joe estate, but it didn't feel like she was avoiding him, just a silent contentment. Daniel leaned back into the cushions and glanced sideways. I think my mother's going to replace one of the twins with you, he said. Vivian's lips curved. Is that so? She kept offering you seconds. That's basically an adoption ceremony in the Joe household. I accepted, she said lightly. Bold move. I was hungry. He chuckled under his breath. You do realize you've reset all their expectations, right? Ryan's going to ask for sword lessons. The twins are probably designing your family crest into next year's festival banners. They wouldn't be the first. Silence again, but easier now. The kind that exists between people who no longer need to pretend they don't care. Then she turned to the window, voice quieter. What will you be doing while I'm away? Daniel raised an eyebrow. Away. I'm leaving in the morning, she said. Lotus Peak, sword seclusion, 6 months, maybe longer. He blinked. So that's it? One perfect weekend and a silent exit? She didn't smile. My blade rhythms are off. My technique's too sharp. Not clean. I need clarity. He studied her for a long moment. The clarity, he echoed. That why you haven't mentioned him? Vivian's eyes flicked toward him, but she didn't answer as there wasn't a need. She didn't stammer a defense or denial. She simply watched him with those volute eyes of hers. Daniel understood her thoughts. He wasn't sure how. He just did. She wasn't running from Jinshun. She was trying to comprehend the parts of herself that still looked for him. All right, Daniel said, exhaling. Then I guess I won't see you until the Imperial Martial Tournament. Probably not. Unless you break seclusion early. I don't break things early. No, he said. You don't. He looked down at the silk-wrapped box she'd thrown him earlier, still unopened, sitting in his lap like a question. Vivian spoke before he could. You? He glanced up. Me? What will you be doing? He hesitated, then answered softer than before. Working on something, a project, something big, I think. If I'm right, it'll change how people understand martial inheritance. She tilted her head. Change how? Structure, he said. Foundation mapping. Technique synchronization across variable bloodlines. A framework for making cultivation empirical. She didn't blink. You're trying to build something repeatable, he nodded. Something reliable. Something that doesn't rely on luck or family legacy or good weather and waterfall enlightenment. Vivian's expression didn't change, but she listened. You think it'll work? She asked. I think it has to, he said. Another silence passed. Then she added more quietly. You'll be there? At the tournament? Daniel met her gaze. I will. I don't want the Lee name embarrassed. He smiled faintly. That would be a first. Vivian's lips twitched, but it wasn't quite a smile. She turned her face back toward the window. And that's when he saw it. Sadness. Or the shadow of it. Something small but complex and real slipped into her expression like a heartbeat gone wrong. She wasn't crying, she wasn't frowning, but her jaw tightened. Her breath hitched. Once. Daniel kept his mouth shut. Didn't reach out because he couldn't fix it. Didn't ruin it by pretending he could. When the carriage slowed, she stood. He didn't follow right away, but slowly walked after her until they returned to their suit. She headed to her private area. At the door, she paused. She watched him and he her. She gave him a small smile and a raised eyebrow. "Good night, Ethan." He returned the gesture. "Good night, Vivian." Then she stepped down into the light of the estate, and the door clicked closed behind her. Daniel sat back, and for once he wasn't sure if he wanted the quiet.
Chapter 35. Vivian. The gates of the Lee estate opened before dawn. No ceremonial send-off. No dramatic speeches. Just a line of pale cloaked riders, a hovering supply cart, and the soft rhythm of hooves over dew-slick stone. Vivian rode at the center of the formation, flanked by May and 4 elite handmaidens. Each of them was armed, robed in silence, and alert. Not for threats, but for missteps. They would not embarrass their lady. Not today. Not on the road to Lotus Peak. The higher they climbed, the quieter it became. The wind sharpened. The light shifted. The cloud line blurred everything behind them into memory. It suited her, and yet her chest ached. Not sharply, not enough to stop her, but it had settled there, low and quiet. Between breath and bone. She hadn't said goodbye. Not properly. Ethan, still unreadable, still maddening, had walked her to the steps, had said nothing. And it wasn't indifference. She knew that now. It was restraint, and she didn't know whether to resent him for it or thank him. May rode behind her, quiet as ever. Vivian could feel the curiosity there, but no intrusion. May never pushed. They reached the first overlook by late morning. A flat plateau framed by whisper pines and a thin, frost-fed stream. Vivian raised a hand. "Break here." May approached, voice low. "We're 2 hours from the pass. I'll return shortly." No questions. Of course not. Vivian dismounted, her robe catching faint light as she turned from the trail and walked alone into the pine-lined slope that curved inward toward a familiar glade. She didn't plan this, but her feet knew where they were going, and so did her heart. Jin was waiting. He always was. Seated cross-legged on a low stone ledge, eyes closed, breath steady. Not meditating. Just waiting. Listening. The way he did when he wasn't sure she'd come. But hoped anyway. His head lifted as she stepped into the clearing. "I thought I felt you," he said softly. Vivian didn't answer. She crossed the glade. The moss was cold beneath her boots, but clean. Unfiltered by politics or expectation. Jane rose slowly. No bow. No smile. But that look, the open one. Careful. Like he was trying to match her shape without assuming her need. "I heard you were going up the peak," he said. 6 months? Maybe longer, she said. "Clarity?" he asked. She nodded once. He took a half step closer. Not invading her space, just closing the air between them. "You look tired." Vivian's brow twitched. "I'm not. I didn't say you were weak." The silence stretched. She felt the ache press sharper behind her ribs. He saw it. "You didn't come for a lesson," Jin said. "You didn't come to say goodbye." Still, she didn't speak. "I've seen that look twice," he added. "Once when you asked for your father's blade." "And the second?" He stepped closer. Not a reach, just proximity. His fingers brushed the edge of her sleeve. Light. Familiar. "The night before your wedding." Vivian's jaw set. But she didn't pull away. She didn't want to. She hated how steady he was. How easily he could still match her rhythm. How this place, this moment, felt like it had been waiting for her to arrive. Like she was the one who was late. "I don't know what I'm doing here," she said. Jin's voice was quiet. "You're searching." Then he kissed her. It wasn't the first time. They'd kissed before quiet, stolen moments on rooftops or inside training courtyards. It had always felt inevitable. Charged, beautiful. But this time, it was different. Slower, softer, less need, more meaning. His hand cupped the side of her jaw. Gentle, steady. And she kissed him back. Because part of her still wanted to. Because this was the last place she remembered being sure of herself. Because he still saw her the way she used to want to be seen. She didn't stop it. Didn't rationalize it. She just felt it. And for one breath, one flicker of stillness. She let it matter. When she pulled back, his hand didn't follow. He didn't chase her. Didn't try to hold on. He just stood there. Like he understood something they hadn't said aloud. Vivian touched her lips once. Not regretfully. Just to anchor herself. Then she turned. Walked away. Didn't say goodbye. Didn't look back. She told herself it was closure. That she needed to let him go. But the truth was harder, because she hadn't let him go. Not really. And she hadn't chosen Ethan either. Not yet. And as the cold wind of the Lotus Mountains wrapped around her like a second robe, the ache in her chest stayed sharp. Not because she was lost, but because for the first time in her life, she wasn't sure what she wanted. As the last bend of the trail disappeared behind her, Vivian emerged once more into the silence of her waiting retinue. No one asked where she'd gone. May simply stepped forward and handed her the reins. Vivian took them without a word. She mounted, settled, and for the first time since they left the estate, she looked back. Not at the path, not at Jen, at the clouds, at the sky she had left behind, at a house that didn't quite feel like hers, and a husband she hadn't chosen, but who somehow kept surprising her anyway. Ethan hadn't kissed her. He hadn't begged her to stay. He hadn't asked for anything. And yet, in the quiet of their last ride together, he'd offered something no one else ever had. Not loyalty, not admiration, not even love. Just space. A place where she could be herself without permission. A partner who would meet her blade for blade, silence for silence, and never flinch from the questions she didn't know how to ask. Vivian exhaled slowly. The ache was still there, but it was different now. Not weightless, not healed, just acknowledged. She looked forward again, toward the mountain peak, toward months of solitude and steel and discipline, and maybe, if she was honest, toward the day she would come back down and see what remained. "Let's ride," she said. The riders obeyed. The wind rose, and the mountains kept their silence.
Chapter 36, Daniel. The lift hissed open, revealing a narrow corridor lit with mana-threaded sconces. Soft amber light pulsed along the baseboards, warm but functional. At the end of the hall stood a single door, double-sealed, reinforced, and marked with a sigil keyed to one soul. Daniel stepped forward. The enchantment stirred to life. A quiet pulse of energy swept over his skin, testing for discrepancies. Identity confirmed Ethan Joe. The lock unlatched with a whisper, and the door slid open. The lab wasn't what Daniel expected. Crystalline lights floated above modular workbenches, arranged with brutal efficiency. Glass walls shimmered behind containment seals. Conduits lined the ceiling like spiderwebs of polished copper, each one humming faintly with suppressed mana. This was a space of confidence, a sanctum carved from trust and ambition. Polished floors veined with jade, reinforced walls pulsing with mana sync arrays, projectors, alchemical mounts, and suspended drafting rings arranged with near-surgical intent. Even the lighting felt intentional, bright, white, clinical. Purpose, not vanity. "They gave you all this?" Daniel murmured. "Gave us this," Ethan corrected. "Don't forget it was you who earned their respect." Daniel continued walking, taking it all in. "Built with General Lee's blessing," Ethan said, his voice quiet but firm. "Cleared through state channels, full Imperial catalog access. You don't build something like this for someone you want to contain. You build it for someone you believe in." Daniel's steps echoed faintly as he moved deeper. The air smelled of stone, ink, and filtered power, none of the cloying perfume of ceremonial halls. Just clarity. "Not a lab," he said. "A launch site. And a forge," Ethan added. "This is where it happens." At the chamber's heart stood a central worktable heartstone slab, rimmed in containment alloy, layered with embedded resonance lines and induction glyphs. Daniel stepped forward and laid his palm on the surface. The miner responded, not welcoming, just recognizing. He swung the satchel off his shoulder and unwrapped a heavy bundle sealed in treated cloth. Scrolls, glyphstones, inked diagrams. Some new, others ancient. All of them recovered from Ethan's family home, not carried out of nostalgia, but because they mattered. "This is it," Ethan said. "My life's work, everything I discovered, and everything I never got to finish. When I first got back, I wrote down everything I could remember about my past life, my visions, that weird death walking. Everything." Daniel was slow to answer. "We cannot let anyone else see that stuff. They'll think you're crazy. We're crazy." "We are, kind of." Daniel didn't disagree. He placed the first glyph stone in the central ring. Light rippled outward. Threads of arcane energy curled into the air, linking to suspended projection rings above. Diagrams bloomed mid-air complex, half-finished, elegant. Ethan's handwriting flickered to life across spectral manuscripts, sharp and spare. "We're behind already," Ethan murmured. "If we're going to make a difference, we're already behind. The first time, I had to work meticulously alone, step by step. But this time, we don't have that luxury." Daniel began unrolling the rest careful, methodical. Scrolls by topic, glyphs sequenced for resonance pull. The lab's embedded readers synced one by one, each glyph lighting up as the systems absorbed and indexed the incoming work. We won't need as much time, Daniel said quietly. You've got resources now? We'll have help with testing and materials retrieval, but we still have to build this from scratch. Geez, what I'd give for access to ChatGPT. Overhead, the projection arrays flickered once, then stabilized. A slate of projects shimmered into being, tagged and hovering just above the table's surface. At the center, the integration project, the divine frame. Active surrounding it, bloodline harmonization, failed monophase drift study. Paused core containment stability map. In progress. Adaptive inheritance model. Archived. Daniel's gaze lingered on the first. So this is the one. It always was, Ethan said. This has the power to change our world. And if we're going to face what's coming, we have to change the world. Daniel looked at the waiting tools, at the arrayed scrolls, at the embedded glyphs slowly responding to their presence. Then let's finish it. And the lab, sensing its masters at work, hummed quietly to life. Daniel studied the scrolls for a moment longer, letting his fingers trace a line of unfamiliar script notes in Ethan's own hand, scribbled between diagrams. Some so hurried they nearly vanished into the parchment. He looked up at the softly glowing projection, the glyph light shimmering across the walls. Then he set his palms against the table's edge, leaned forward and murmured, "Well, I guess it isn't alone anymore." They stood in silence for a minute, the hum of the lab the only sound. Daniel finally spoke. "What went wrong, Ethan, the first time?" Ethan didn't answer at first. It wasn't just one thing, not the fall of the Lee family, not Claire, not even the war. Daniel frowned. Then what? 1,000 little ones, Ethan said. Every time I ignored a decision, every moment I let someone else steer, every person I didn't help when I should have. It wasn't betrayal that destroyed us. It was erosion. And it wasn't just me. Daniel sat on the edge of the table. And now we stop the rot before it spreads. Daniel's gaze was hard. When does it start? Ethan was quiet. If I had to narrow it down, the first big crisis was at the Imperial Marshal Tournament. If we can change what happens there, we buy time and maybe avoid a rebellion that fractures the Empire. Daniel nodded slowly. We'll be ready. He turned back toward the console, hands moving across the surface, as the projection field realigned. Lights flickered, glyphs rotated. But before he could speak again, Ethan's voice cut through low, steady. There's something I haven't told you. Daniel stilled, didn't turn. All right. A memory, or rather, the absence of one. That made him look up. Ethan continued, There's a seal in my mind. Deep, buried, artificial. Daniel's eyes narrowed. What kind of seal? Not trauma. Not something I blocked out, a beat. It's deliberate. Precise. I can feel it like a locked chamber something inside me that was closed off. Intentionally. Can you see what's behind it? No. Ethan's voice stayed even, but the edges were clipped. It's not just missing. It's protected. Stabilized. Like someone didn't just hide it. They engineered the forgetting. Daniel folded his arms. So what does that mean? It means someone somewhere didn't want me to remember. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Daniel exhaled, slow and controlled. Then, there are only two reasons to do something like that. Go on. One, Daniel said, it's dangerous. Something you weren't ready for. Possible. Two, he continued, voice tightening, it's the kind of truth that ruins someone else's plan. Also possible. They stood in silence, the lab humming softly around them. Beyond the floating schematics and the light of the divine frame, something else had shifted quietly, like the first ripple in a still pond. Daniel turned back to the table. His eyes darkened. Then we figure it out. He tapped the framework glyph. Because if we can get this thing working, it won't just be a research project, Ethan said. It'll be a universal interface for progress. It could let anyone refine faster, train harder, ascend higher. Which makes it, Daniel said, the most dangerous weapon we could build, or the only one that can stop what's coming. The lab's core chamber pulsed with ambient light-cool blues and soft golds, radiating from embedded mana lines that ran across the stone like veins beneath skin. Daniel stood at the center projection table, scrolls and glyph stones surrounding him like pieces of code waiting to be cracked. Notes hovered in the air fragments of theory, cultivation schematics, core resonance charts. Most were dense, some were brilliant. One stopped him cold. It wasn't filed with the others. No header, no date, just a string of handwritten glyphs buried in the margin of a bloodline stabilization scroll. Daniel frowned. He brushed the projection rune and magnified the field. The schematic unfurled layered matrices of alchemical resonance, conversion loops, blood pattern harmonics, a dozen independent systems, each nested in impossibly tight synchronization. He didn't need the simulation overlays to know what this was, but he triggered them anyway. Data flared, ascension velocity, core saturation rates, breakthrough tolerances. And scrawled almost hidden, one set of initials, CW. Daniel's pulse jumped. The simulation lit up 12 breakthroughs in 14 months. No side effects, no friction, no deviation. Her elemental resonance wasn't cultivated. It had been sculpted, structured, made clean. She didn't ascend, Daniel whispered. You rebuilt her. A pause, then Ethan's voice. You weren't supposed to see that yet. Daniel didn't flinch. That wasn't medicine. That was a rewrite. It wasn't meant to be permanent. Daniel turned slowly. What did you use? A longer silence. Divine reagent. Mixed with my blood. Daniel's gaze darkened. You infused her full spectrum. Not at first. It started as a stabilizer. I was trying to preserve her meridians after the backlash from that prototype cycle. Daniel exhaled. You didn't just preserve her. You transformed her. Every limit she hit gone. Her path wasn't just open. You paved it. I didn't know it would go that far. But it did. Daniel stepped back, turning toward the heart of the lab, where projections of the framework spiraled faintly in the air. And now I know why the last timeline bent around her. You didn't just clear the path, you rebuilt the road. Ethan didn't respond immediately. It cost more than I thought it would. Daniel's fingers hovered above the glyph interface. So we refine it, stabilize it, make it accessible to anyone. Without the blood? With the framework, Daniel said. We don't brute force the solution, we build a translation layer. Ethan stirred. A divine interface. Daniel nodded. She became mythic. Let's make sure this time she's not the only one. The lab responded, low hums, shifting into alignment. A projection field opened wider. A new project tag appeared in the air. Framework Integrated Divine Path. Preliminary Design. Daniel leaned in. We start here. It won't be simple, Ethan warned. The framework's not just a technique. It's a system, a construct I tried to build from intuition and theory. But there were gaps. It was like trying to design magic flow with no array. The technology didn't exist yet. Daniel's breath hitched, then he smiled. Oh my God, he said, you're a genius. You weren't designing around what did exist. What? Ethan's voice sharpened. You were designing toward what could exist. Daniel turned back to the console. You were trying to future-proof it, build a model that could adapt as the world changed. A living system that could absorb anything, bloodlines, divine resonance, even alien cultivation models. That wasn't the plan, Ethan said slowly, but that would explain why so many components stalled. Daniel tapped the crystal relay. It stalled because it was waiting for me. Silence. Then, let's get it working. Daniel's voice dropped to a whisper. No more chosen ones. Let's build a system that chooses back. He pressed his palm to the table, and the divine frame began to glow. Daniel watched the projections cycle. The framework's core lattice flickered, waiting for input. There's something else, Ethan said, quieter than before. You're not going to like it. Daniel didn't look up. Let's have it. A pause. You're going to have to seduce the Imperial Princess. The lab went still. Daniel blinked once slowly. You want to run that by me again? I'm sorry, Ethan said, but it's the only way. Daniel closed his eyes. Of course it is. He didn't curse, didn't laugh, just reached for the next glyph. Like nothing had changed. But something had, and they both knew it. Chapter 37, Daniel. Ethan, Daniel said, his voice flat, his expression unreadable. I know you think you're funny, but you're going to have to explain this one. He paused, just long enough to let the weight settle. First, why, exactly, would I need to seduce an imperial princess? And second, and more importantly, what makes you think I can seduce an imperial princess? Ethan didn't miss a beat. If he still had a body, he would have shrugged with his whole spine. Well, I don't know, he said. You seem to be doing a pretty damn good job with Vivian, and she's the Ice Queen. I figured if anyone could crack imperial-grade emotional armor, it'd be you. Daniel rubbed the bridge of his nose. Though, are you sure this isn't a dream and you're one of my frat buddies messing with me? Never mind, don't answer that. He exhaled sharply. Ignore the seduction part for a second. Why would I even need to get close to the princess? Ethan's tone shifted, still casual, but laced with something sharper. You remember how I said the Imperial Prince dies during the tournament? Daniel nodded slowly. Yeah, not exactly the kind of thing you forget. Well, Ethan said, I don't know that exactly. I know he dies around that time. What I remember is that the Imperial Princess, she knew something was coming. She was trying to stop it. I don't know the details, whether she figured out the full plot or just caught the scent of it, but I remember she tried to warn people. And they didn't listen. Daniel's eyes narrowed. You think it was an inside job? I think, Ethan said slowly, that someone made sure she wasn't heard. Maybe they didn't believe her. Or maybe they couldn't afford to. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. So we need her help. Exactly. And your plan to get her to help us, Daniel said, voice rising slightly, is for me to seduce her? Fastest way into someone's trust, isn't it? Daniel stared at the ceiling. What are we, protagonists in a scandalous romance drama? Ethan didn't answer. Daniel sighed. Okay, let's pretend this isn't completely insane. How exactly do you expect me to meet with an imperial princess? She's not exactly on the local palace tour. Ethan's scoff echoed in his mind. No, you're the son-in-law of House Lee. That's second only to the imperial family. General Lee isn't just some famous old man with a sword. He's the general. Their general. If you wanted a formal audience with the princess, you could get one. Daniel blinked. You're serious. If you wanted to, you could walk into the capital and get invited to a banquet she's attending by tomorrow. 2 days, tops. You have the access, the name, the alliance. Daniel rubbed his temples. And how exactly do I do that without looking like I'm trying to infiltrate the imperial inner circle with ulterior motives? Because that definitely won't backfire. Ethan was unhelpfully calm. No idea, but it has to be done. Daniel looked up again. So that's it. That's your plan? Yes. Seduce the imperial princess and charm the secrets out of her. No backup, no contingencies. Just wing it and hope she falls into our lap. We don't have time to be subtle. Daniel snorted. That's a really stupid plan. Look, Ethan said, we need to know what she knows. The tournament's not just a disaster, it's the fuse. After that, everything unravels. The bloodline sickness surges. The imperial succession fractures. War in the south. Famine in the Great Plains. The collapse of the seer seat. Every major fault line splits open. The demon sect doesn't just show up, they capitalize. And through all of that, the princess was the only one trying to stop the first blow before anyone else even knew there was a blade. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he muttered, So go to the capital, find the imperial princess, and somehow earn her trust, possibly through charm, political finesse, or God forbid, actual romance, while making sure I don't get assassinated in the process. Yup. Daniel let out a long, slow breath. Fantastic. I'm starting to see why you died in your last life. Chapter 38, Daniel. Daniel sat cross-legged on the floor of the surprisingly equipped Lee family research hall, surrounded by an avalanche of scrolls, books, and flickering crystal projections. The room smelled of old ink and mana-dense, metallic, and dry like breathing in powdered stone. Glyph arrays pulsed faintly along the walls, echoing the low hum of the lab's magical infrastructure. Overhead, spirit-scribed projectors drifted slowly, casting fragments of path icon footage and translucent text into the air. The footage was clearly older and clearly degrading. Still, it got the point across. Daniel brushed a brittle page aside with the back of his wrist, sighing. Okay, this is getting ridiculous. The footage from the Imperial Archives hadn't helped. Dozens of public appearances, summit reels, military parades, ceremonial galas, and yet every single one showed the same thing. A woman veiled in imperial silk, her voice filtered through illusion arrays, her face perpetually obscured by light. At blessing ceremonies, she stood beneath enchanted lanterns. In recorded debates, she was shrouded in golden mist. Even in archival portraits, her features were hidden by carefully arranged fans, veils, or tricks of shadow. She's like a ghost with a wardrobe budget, Daniel muttered. How does a woman this famous leave so little behind? Ethan remained quiet, brooding in the back of his mind. Daniel could feel the tension pressure collecting behind his temples, like a storm on the horizon. They'd torn through everything. Academic journals, royal court rosters, gossip transcripts, merchant logs, even cross-referenced private healing records. Dozens of nobles had claimed to have spoken with the imperial princess. interacted with, and even danced with her at royal balls. But not one could describe her consistently. Some said she was warm. Others said she never smiled. Brilliant, mysterious, terrifying kind, unbelievably gorgeous on par with the four beauties of the empire. One wandering path icon called the Princess, light distilled into human form. Another dubbed her a mirror made of questions. But none of it added up. There was no clarity, just myth wrapped in precision, sprinkled with misdirection. The misinformation campaign was almost poetic. The only universal truth was that no one outside her inner circle had seen her face. Not once, not in over a decade. Daniel leaned back against the edge of the central table, arms draped loosely over his knees. You'd think with all the projection orbs the Empire tosses around, someone would have caught a glimpse, even by accident. She controls the coverage, Ethan replied. The light tricks, the filtered voice. Every technique used to obscure her image is sanctioned. It's not vanity, it's protection. And I think there's a reason for that. Daniel exhaled. And what is that? Ethan considered the question. I am pretty sure it has to do with her bloodline, which is supposed to be extremely powerful. Daniel couldn't worry about that right now. So what are we even looking for? A woman we can't see, who never speaks directly, who might die alongside her brother in a royal tournament we're not invited to? Basically, Ethan said. Sucks to be the good guy, Daniel snorted. You're telling me. They both went still, not silent still. A different kind of pause. Actually, Ethan's voice returned, lower now, sharper. Now that I think about it, I might know our way in. Daniel raised an eyebrow without moving. Oh, this I've got to hear. If you say anything about trying to sneak me into the castle to act like an exotic dancer or something, I am seriously going to find a way, if it's the last thing I do, to punch you right in the face. First, I'm glad our friendship is based on threats. Second, that isn't what I meant. The Imperial Princess, Ethan said slowly, is a scholar. Daniel blinked. Yeah, not the piece of prophetic genius you thought it would be. She's a scholar, Ethan repeated, ignoring Daniel's outburst. A real one. Not some ceremonial figurehead with ghostwriters. She debates, publishes, attends closed-door theory summits. She even writes under a pseudonym for the Imperial Guild of Inquiry. You're telling me the Empire's favorite enigma is moonlighting as an academic? Pretty much. Daniel stared up at the ceiling. Sophie Virlin, the golden mirror of the Imperial Court. The woman who people say can collapse an argument with a glance. That's Sophie. The very same, Ethan said, and Daniel could hear the grin in his voice. All the rumors about her looks and temperament are smoke, but what do I know? The princess is witty, sharp, and politically terrifying. She's also obsessed with deep structure cultivation theory, especially divine resonance and inheritance stability. Daniel scratched the back of his head. Well, I guess I'm a scholarly guy, kind of, sort of, on paper. You're more than scholarly. You're the perfect target. She's surrounded by warriors, fanboys, sword jocks trying to flex their way into her inner circle. If rumors from my past life hold any weight, what she actually wants is someone who sees past the performance. Daniel squinted. Let me guess. Ethan's voice dropped to a whisper. Smart man. You're a smart man. It totally works. Daniel groaned. This is your actual plan? She's technically engaged, Ethan said, ignoring him. I'm a political arrangement. The guy's name is Dathon, second son of House Laren. Good bloodline, great form, zero depth. And she's still loyal? Painfully, Ethan said. She doesn't cheat. She doesn't entertain advances. That's not the point. Then what is? Ethan's tone shifted quieter, but suddenly more intense. She has one person she'd burn kingdoms to protect. Daniel sat forward. Who? Elizabeth, her handmaiden. She's not just a servant, she's family. They grew up together, and 2 months from now, Elizabeth gets hit with a mana backlash during a divine threading ritual, Ethan said. Sophie's trying to isolate an unknown divine lineage, something celestial, maybe even corrupted. Elizabeth volunteers to act as the stabilizer. It goes wrong. I know because Claire ended up there as her family deals with exotic medical materials, so I have some first-hand knowledge of this one. Daniel frowned. You say it goes wrong. How wrong exactly? She survives, Ethan said, but she can't walk for 6 months. Core fragmentation. Meridian collapse. They pull her off palace grounds for emergency treatment. No one outside Sophie's circle even knows what happened. Daniel rubbed his temples. And you want us to fix this? Ethan was calm now. Yes. Daniel narrowed his eyes. You remember what caused it? I remember the cause, Ethan said. It wasn't natural. It was a failed spiritual compression cycle. It shredded her inner circulation. I saw the pattern last time. I even tried to help, but I didn't have access to the resources I needed. Daniel shook his head. All right, let's say I believe you. How do we fix it? You don't, Ethan said, voice almost reverent. I do. Daniel snorted. You're not exactly in a body. You've got my hands, Ethan said, my recall, my technique. This actually leads to a discussion I've been meaning to have with you. We're too independent. We have to try to come more together. I've been working on trying to bring more of our resonance together like when we share memories. We'll synthesize a stabilizer, something that neutralizes the backlash and binds the torn circuits. You deliver it. Daniel leaned back again, slower this time. And if it works? Then the princess doesn't just owe us, Ethan said. She remembers us. A long silence followed, not strained, just loaded. Daniel saw the shape of the plan now. It wasn't seduction. It wasn't political infiltration. It was utility. If they healed the one person Sophie Verlin couldn't afford to lose, they didn't win affection. They earned trust. They bought access. And if it doesn't work, Daniel asked. Then we tried, Ethan replied. That alone might open a door. Daniel stood and paced toward the far wall, where lab glyphs shimmered against the stone. 3 months, he said. That's all we've got. 3 months, Ethan agreed. No, to build the framework, stabilize a medical prototype, and sneak into the life of the most protected woman in the empire. Daniel looked up at the ceiling, took a breath, and exhaled hard. I'm going to need better robes. Chapter 39, Daniel. The lab lights pulsed low and steady, the air thick with stored mana and old invention. Crystal strands hummed faintly beneath Daniel's boots as he crossed to the main work table, a wide, rune-etched slab surrounded by relics of half-completed theory. He stood over a boxed array of spell matrix crystals, each one no bigger than a peach pit, their edges flickering with dormant power. Daniel, with Ethan, of course, were up late trying to get a handle on their system/framework issue, the problem with the princess's handmaiden on the back burner for the moment. 3 weeks have already passed, and they are making slow, really slowly, crazy slow progress. Part of that process had been Daniel learning about the formal application of mana the old-fashioned way. It was freaking impossible. How anyone got anything done seemed crazy. Currently, he was applying what he learned to some experiments that Ethan said was crucial to his development. Start with the leftmost one, Ethan's voice murmured from the back of his mind. That's the anchor node. Everything else cascades from there. Daniel followed the instruction, aligning the squared crystal into the first socket. The silver-threaded runes around the socket flared in soft recognition. Why are they shaped like this? Daniel muttered. Because some dead noble 2 centuries ago thought squares were divine geometry, Ethan said. The theory was mana likes clean edges and right angles. That's about as deep as the explanation goes. Daniel smirked, placing the rest of the matrix into its slots one at a time, guided by Ethan's fragmented memory and steady mental commentary. It was a simple array, or so Ethan claimed. A basic delayed cast spell, designed to create a soft kinetic barrier in a controlled space. Simple, Daniel echoed, for magic. Simple for idiots, Ethan grumbled, but still expensive. Every adjustment to the sequence burns out a thread. Every recast destabilizes the matrix. And if your intent so much as wavers, the spell doesn't fizzle, it misfires. Daniel connected the final crystal and laid his hand over the array. He concentrated, not just on pushing mana, but shaping it, wrapping it around a clear thought. Protect, then dissolve. The central crystal lit with a pulsing blue glow, a thin shimmer spread across the table, rising in a dome barely visible to the eye. It held for 3 seconds, then collapsed in on itself and vanished. Daniel exhaled. Well, Ethan said, it didn't explode. That's progress. Daniel looked down at the array. The crystal tips were already dimming, flickering with the strain of single-use burnout. All that setup, he said, for one 3-second bubble. And that was a success, Ethan replied. Try modifying it and you'll blow half the table into the wall. Ask me how I know. Daniel stared at the array for a long moment. Daniel held up the gauntlet. The runes were still faintly glowing, fractured in 3 places, but intact enough to hint at what had once been a stable enchantment. So walk me through it, he said. How do enchanted artifacts actually work? Ethan's voice echoed from the back of his mind, steady. You take a spiritually and mana-receptive material metal, bone, refined jade, whatever, and embed it with a ritual-bound spell. It's usually done with physical glyph work, sometimes mental etching for high-tier artifacts. Then you infuse the structure with mana, seal it with intent, and bind the result to a specific user or bloodline or activation sequence. Daniel rotated the gauntlet in his hand. So you're writing a static function into an object, a single spell or set of spells. Preset. No real input variation. Exactly. Once it's sealed, the artifact behaves like a trigger. Activated under the right conditions, it does the thing. No variation. No adaptation. What happens if the user's emotional state doesn't match the binding? It's a closed system at that point, so it's more difficult to affect, but with strong enough emotion, the spell can misfire, or it warps, or, in a few memorable cases, explodes. Daniel set the gauntlet down. So even enchanted gear runs on hard-coded spell effect. One spell, one alignment. One user, if you're lucky, not all the time. Pretty much. Daniel folded his arms. And this is considered a high achievement? Hey, there are practitioners that can fly. Can you fly? Hey, Daniel snorted. Ethan continued. Centuries of tradition. Enchanted artifacts are symbols of legacy, craftsmanship, power. I mean, they build the Maginet. And there are a lot of workarounds, as you call them, but it works. Daniel gave the gauntlet one last glance, then turned back to the main table, where broken mana slates and fractured sigil arrays lay scattered across a half-cleaned schematic. Okay, he said. Now let me get this straight. All spellcasting, not just artifacts, but real-time casting too, is based on embedded commands, either mentally visualized or physically written, with glyphs or circles, which we call arrays, all powered by raw mana and all aligned to the caster's emotional state, an activation sequence, shot and trigger. Yes, and the system has no optimization, no reusable parts, no formal interface, no error isolation. I never thought about it like that, but yeah. Daniel leaned against the table. You're describing magic-powered spaghetti code. What's spaghetti? He laughed. It's food in most circumstances. A type of noodle made with semolina wheat, water, a bit of salt, sometimes eggs. But I digress. What I'm referring to here is computer language. It's what we called software too tangled to fix without starting over. Patches stacked on bugs stacked on duct tape. I don't know what any of those words mean. Let me back up, Daniel continued, and I'm referring to something from my world. Computer language. We called it software, a kind of logic system we used to run machines. Spaghetti code was what we called it when things got too messy to fix. Patches stacked on top of bugs, stacked on top of temporary workarounds that should have never worked in the first place. A pause. Yeah, I know you're trying to help. Daniel grinned. Sorry. Yeah, that's like you speaking Chinese and me talking slower and thinking it will help. Let me start at the beginning. He straightened and gestured toward the mana console. You were trying to build a construct machine to help with spellcasting, etc. We had these things called computers that were the same type of thing. They are machines built to process logic, yes, no, true, false, ones and zeros. Binary code. Every program, every function, every complex instruction, it all boiled down to combinations of two states. And people built things out of that? In my world, people do everything with these machines, Daniel said. Participate in commerce, government, war. They use it to connect with family and entertainment. Entire economies ran on it. But it only worked because the language we used, code, was structured, modular, measurable, programmable. It could change and adapt with needs, wants, and movement in the marketplace. Ethan was quiet. Then, finally, how do these computers work? With mana? Doesn't the mana hurt the system because of inconsistency in flow, intent and purity? Or are all these computers connected to ley lines in your world? Daniel smiled, a little crooked. Not at all. Mainly because they don't work on mana. We don't have mana where I am from. Then how do they do anything? If there is no mana, they run on electricity, Daniel said. Think of it like a controlled lightning pulse. Circuits act like channels, manaless meridians that allow the movement of energy. That energy moves through them in precise patterns, flipping between on and off, yes and no. From that binary rhythm, we built everything. So, they're like talisman arrays, Ethan said slowly, but without the intention. Just the energetic pathways, the structure. Cannot say for sure, as I am not exactly sure how talisman arrays work. Intent wasn't in the wire, it was in the programmable design. It is in the instruction, or it's supposed to be. Our instructions are written with the code, and usually adjusted through interfaces that don't mess with the underlying structure, which would consist of two parts. Hardware, the actual materials that make the machine that gives it power, and creates the components to bring the code to life, and software, or the actual language that allows the machine to do what it does. Daniel pointed to the crystal array. I think the problem with your machines is that there is as much mysticism as there is engineering. Let me give you an example. This right here, it's a mess. Too many overlapping and incomplete instructions. No modular design, and when something breaks, you can't fix one part without screwing up the rest. That's the spaghetti code I was talking about. A tangled disaster that only works sort of halfway, and only because everyone's afraid to touch it, because they are afraid it will fail. Ethan made a thoughtful sound. So, what you're saying is, our entire magical system is a plate of noodles someone dropped, scooped back up, and enchanted. It's a little more complicated than that. From what I can see, your spell creation is trying to do everything without actually breaking down and compartmentalizing the task. It's the structure, the fuel, the instructions, and conclusion purpose, all thrown together into this jumbled foundation. No wonder it breaks down. Ethan sounded almost annoyed. That's so stupid it makes sense. It's been what I have been trying to pinpoint in 2 lifetimes. Daniel laughed. Welcome to system design, he pointed at the crystal network. You've basically got a magic-powered computer system here, but it's running on gut feelings, good vibes, and century-old prayers. Daniel stepped back, eyes scanning the shelves lining the room racks of scrolls, incomplete constructs, cracked core fragments. You realize what this means, right? That the Empire runs on a spell system nobody understands? I've been yelling about that for years. Daniel shook his head. No. It means you've accidentally built a distributed computing framework without any of the logic control that makes systems reliable, and you've embedded it into every level of governance, while being completely vulnerable. Ethan had been unusually quiet ever since Daniel compared spell arrays to spaghetti code. The mental silence stretched as Daniel followed him deeper into the lab's archive wing. A long corridor filled with wall-mounted crystalline consoles and filing arrays, pulsing with residual mana. Then Ethan spoke, low and sardonic. You want to see something stupid? Watch this. Daniel stopped at the main terminal, a waist-high pillar of black crystal, its surface dotted with glowing sigils. Ethan guided him mentally. Right node, communication interface. Left, archive retrieval. Center, encoded command trigger. It's all hardwired into the Lee Estate's private relay chamber. Daniel brushed his fingers across the runes. The console warmed, lines of blue light running through the carvings like veins. A shifting field of sigils flickered to life above the crystal, arranged in nested spirals and moving way too fast to be natural. What is this? The state's comm relay system. Everything goes through crystal network relay points scattered across Imperial sectors. Long-range communication, public registry updates, bloodline-verified technique sharing. This is how the Empire talks to itself. Daniel blinked. This is a what, public access magic terminal? Sort of. Nobles have higher permissions. Commoners get filtered access. Scholars pay extra to license node links. Same core system, just throttled by class and clan. Daniel narrowed his eyes. You're describing decentralized servers. Decentralized what? Daniel frowned as another glyph flickered, pulsed, then collapsed into recursive static. This is a distributed information system. You've basically built a magical internet, but there's no OS, no user authentication, no intelligent indexing. Half of this thing is just glowing runes reacting to half-baked legacy input. He gestured at the tangled floating script. It doesn't make sense. How are messages categorized? How are they routed across cities, let alone provinces? Ethan hesitated. That's actually a closely guarded secret. You don't know? No one outside the Imperial infrastructure really does, Ethan admitted. I know the Empire has a central hub somewhere, probably near the capital, where every message is supposedly routed or logged. But how they handle handoffs between devices or control interference? Not a clue. Yet it works. But clearly there is a better way if we can build it, Ethan's voice was dry. A lot of resources are dedicated to the system's upkeep. I do remember that. Elite squads, top-tier spellweavers and writers, all of them dedicated to making this damn thing work. Half the Imperial Registry and the Empire's budget are used to keep this thing working. Daniel tapped one of the floating sigils again. The screen flickered first dim, then pulsing with what looked like layered error glyphs and arcane recursion loops. He took a step back. The system isn't sustainable as is. The silence stretched. Then Daniel asked, when the Demon Clan attacked, do you know what happened to this, what is called? Was it intact? Was it usable? Now, Ethan was quiet for a long moment, then, imagine it. Daniel rolled his eyes. Clever. Shut up, it's a great name. And no to your other question. No, you don't know? Or no, it wasn't. No, it wasn't usable. At least not everywhere. I remember during the war, there were entire regions that went dark. No updates, no recall logs, no way to coordinate. Just silence. Daniel's expression hardened. Then, it failed exactly when it was needed most. Yes. Daniel folded his arms. Then that's what we fix. Ethan chuckled. Among other things. Daniel stared at the console. You know, the thing is, you guys invented a magic-powered, fully decentralized, real-time messaging and data sharing system. And no one taught it how to organize itself. If you think about it, it is impressive. Maybe we lack vision to get it where it needs to be. Daniel paced slowly. Or maybe magic gives you the ability to skip steps, even when it doesn't make sense, if your intention is clear enough. The thing is, this could be incredible. Peer-to-peer spell trading. Live collaborative technique research. Real-time battlefield messaging, all protected and encrypted. All of it is possible. And instead, it's being used to send birthday congratulations and keep technique vaults locked behind clan sigils. Us and Ethan didn't answer right away, likely considering the words. It's what happens when power builds faster than philosophy. Daniel stopped pacing. If we're going to build something new, he said, something better, something that doesn't melt when you cast two thoughts at once, we're going to need tools. Real ones. The ones you describe in your notebook. We will need it for both the framework and the new, Imaginate technical specs as much as we can get. We will need everything you mention. The calibrated diagnostics protocols, spells for clean casting environments, those modified trace readers, the legacy scrapers. Input tools for glyph burning the works. I had those once, Ethan said. Daniel looked up. Ethan's voice was quieter now. Imperial Academy. Deep storage wing. I kept backups in my private vault, assuming the Academy didn't gut the place after they reassigned me. Daniel tilted his head. You think it's still there? If it isn't, we'll make them regret touching it. Daniel smiled. Field trip, then. Chapter 40, Daniel. The table was older than the main house of the Liss, older than most of the estate, even. It stood beneath the observatory dome at the top of the library wing, in a room dusted with spiderweb runes and disused enchantment coils. All right, time for some old-fashioned learning, Ethan said. He sounded way too excited. Daniel rolled his eyes. He laid his hand across the smooth obsidian surface, watching faint rings of light pulse outward in response. Touch-sensitive, Ethan murmured from the back of his mind. Now, runes keyed to ambient mana. Just hold your hand there. The center of the table glowed, lines of light branching outward in a blooming, geometric array. Then, with a sound like a whisper cutting silk, a three-dimensional map sprang to life-layered spirit glass projections, floating above the stone. It began with the core. A sphere of golden light marked the capital. The seat of the imperial family glowing like a miniature sun suspended at the center of the world. Around it, semi-concentric rings of translucent territory shimmered outward. Not perfect circles. These were curved zones of influence, shaped by ley lines, mountain ranges, divine ruins, and ancient spellwork. Each ring pulsed with different resonance patterns, different colors, different intent. Welcome, Ethan said dryly, to the Etherean Empire. Daniel leaned in, absorbing it piece by piece. Cities shimmered in distant pulses. Mountain ridges rose in etched silhouette. Floating provinces and warded valleys rotated gently in suspended formation. And then the full scale of the terrain hit him. Snow-capped ridges bordering subtropical coastlines. Jagged canyonlands and swampy jungles. Highlands scarred by battlefield mana still crackling with residual energy. Entire biomes twisted together in strange, contradictory harmony. It reminded him of home. Not this one, the other one. It's like the continental U.S. had a baby with Rivendell, he murmured. Stay away from their Yellowstone. It could eat you. The range of environments was staggering. Forests gave way to desert plateaus. River deltas bled into mana-pulsing plains. None of it felt governed by logic-only legacy. Mana has a strange effect on the world, Daniel muttered. First thing you need to know, Ethan said. Rings represent areas of influence, not borders. The closer to the capital, in theory, the most influence you have. No one draws clean lines through this kind of territory. You hold what you can. You protect what you must. We're here, Ethan added, pulsing a marker on the western curve of the second ring. House Lee's Dominion. Not part of the first ring by choice, mind you. A smaller orb shimmered into view, its borders traced with silver glyphs and subtle pulses of mana. Daniel watched the lines form, a clean, deliberate shape, locked into the larger spell grid. The area was marked by a massive range, where the color coding distinguished the border between Ring 2 and 3 on the western border. So they control the routes between the capital and the western provinces. Exactly, Ethan said. The general is indispensable to the overall power structure of the empire, but he has little patience for politics and no patience for fools. So they settled out here, where the Hedong mountain range meets a great forest on Chudo. Concerned about mobility for heavy troops, he started building roads. He turned infrastructure into capital influence. Now half the continent's trade passes through Lai-administered channels. Ethan got Daniel to flick his fingers outward. The map expanded. There are 5 great rings. These are basically administrative zones. The first ring lit up. A dense golden cluster of energy flared into view, almost too bright to look at directly. The inner capital, Ethan said. Royal districts, sacred precincts. The imperial palace sits here. It sits on top of the Pier of Endor. It's basically a floating rock in the middle of the empire. But the first king of the land built the empire's palace there, and it's kept people at bay for over 1,500 years. Daniel squinted. A dozen overlapping wards pulsed around a concentrated sphere of power. Access is heavily regulated to the capital, even more so to the Imperial Plaza, the Empress's domain. She's particular. Some might say paranoid. We don't enter unless summoned. An empress? How progressive! Ethan snorted, only because the emperor has been in seclusion for about 10 years. Haha, well, damn the patriarchy. What? Never mind. Ethan pulsed another sector. The second ring. Administrative zones excluding parliament and main residents of the Tier 1 and 2. Houses that aren't the LEs. The major guild halls and 2 of the 3 main academies. He gestured toward a spiral cluster of towers and rolling hills. That's the Imperial Academy. Daniel tilted his head. And that's where your old lab is? Indeed, an adjunct wing sealed. The Academy's a weird place, almost a mini-kingdom to itself. The headmaster is another one of the few peak human experts that are alive. The Academy has its own charter. Ancient privileges from the founding war. Not even the Emperor can walk into their archives without cause. So, how did you get in? I earned it, and then got sort of banished after receiving my degrees. Long story. Daniel's attention shifted. The third and fourth rings swept outward. Far larger, more diverse. Their boundaries arced around mountain ridges, vast deserts, highlands, spell-sealed forests and beaches nestled against oceans and lakes. Provincial zones stretched like tangled banners across mana-dense landscapes. Scorched frontier lands held by Housefang, the highland temples of the Wu Consortium, shifting mist valleys that never settled on maps. These are where most advanced cultivators come from, Ethan said. Not Tier 1 house science people who've reached the upper bottlenecks of the human realm. Some even flirting with what lies beyond. The deeper you go, the thinner the air, and the more dangerous the mana currents. There are also concentrations of other power divine, ether, wild qui. Dangerous. But the returns are outrageous. Daniel raised an eyebrow. You're talking about people who went past level 10? Yes. The human realm's ceiling is more than just strength. It's cultural, structural, foundational. If humans are smoke, then anything beyond human is steel. Most of the energy in this world can't even be used properly. Too few people, too many locks, and the methods to ascend beyond human? Fragmented, buried, or outright forbidden. Daniel let that settle. So no ranking system? No S-class cultivators or whatever? That's for guilds and dramatized propaganda. Real cultivators don't wear letter grades. You're either human, or you've transcended. The fifth ring glimmered. Or didn't. Daniel frowned. The outermost edge of the map looked broken. Disordered. More suggestion than territory. The fifth ring isn't mapped, Ethan said. Too volatile. Dead empires, broken space, storms that don't follow rules, demon remnants, no proper governance, and some say portals to other worlds. Daniel raised an eyebrow. You're foreshadowing a little heavily there, my friend. Never mind. So we're going there, right? Eventually, but not yet. Daniel chuckled dryly. Good. Let me survive college first. The map contracted slightly. Ethan pulsed a node within the Academy's second ring sector, a sublayer beneath the visible buildings. This is where it is. My vault. Prototype lab. Isolated beneath the spell engineering department. Sealed after I left, but not deleted. Why not? They think they neutralized the tech. They didn't. They felt that was enough. Daniel studied the ward, cluster swirling like a suspended hurricane of golden light. And you think I can get in? You can. Your body is mine. Same bloodline. Same core signature. I tuned the lock to resonance frequency. Not exactly what I meant. Are they going to let me? Daniel felt the mental shrug. You're the son-in-law of House Lee. They'll have a hard time denying you. Daniel stepped back from the projection, arms folded. This feels big. It is big, Ethan said. That lab contains the only working scaffold I ever built for the framework. Raw materials, cross-reference notes, trace readers, even a few spirit-forged diagnostic rigs. Bottom line, we need what's in there. Ethan paused. If we get that vault open, we go from theory to architecture. Daniel nodded slowly, eyes still on the flickering map. How big is all this land exactly? Ethan paused, calculating. From the far western sea cliffs to the eastern ridge barrier, about 5,000 to 6,000 length. A flying relay ship takes 3 days to cross it, assuming no storm interference. Daniel did the math. Roughly 3,000 miles, so about the size of the continental U.S. And only 10 million people, he muttered. That doesn't track. It used to be more, Ethan said softly. Daniel looked up. Before the last demon war, Ethan continued, this place was alive. Densely packed cities. Endless sex spires, trade routes that pulsed like veins. The fifth ring alone held dynasties. And that was, how long ago? Over 1,000 years. That's long enough for full demographic recovery. Ethan's voice turned quiet. Yes, but they came back, Daniel blinked. Who? The demons. Not in force, not like before. But enough. Quiet. Methodical. Searching. I don't know what for. Daniel stared at the ghost sectors, the unlit border towns, the fractured outlines of cities that hadn't pulsed a single mana signal in decades. And suddenly, 10 million didn't feel like a number. It felt like a countdown. Chapter 41, Daniel. The Imperial Academy looked less like a school and more like a sanctum built to withstand time itself. Vaulted gates rose above him, carved from pale spirit stone, veined with gold and laced with mana-etched runes. The entire front plaza was a performance of legacy statues of sages, fountains that bled charm-fed mist, and banners that shimmered with illusions of the Empire's greatest victories. Daniel had never seen it before, obviously being from another world and all that. And yet, he could feel something familiar in the stone, a pressure, a rhythm beneath the ground, like stepping into a temple built not to worship gods, but knowledge. Straight ahead, Ethan said from the back of his mind. Us left of the main fountain. You'll pass a row of planners. Third one's hiding a ward stone that glitches during core sync pulses. Used to prank people there. Daniel blinked. You remember that? I lived here, Ethan replied. Or tried to. Beside him, Nathan Lee stretched with his arms folded behind his head. Brother-in-law, you didn't really go here, did you? This place is for a bunch of people who can't throw a proper punch. Daniel sighed at his younger brother-in-law. He'd been halfway through recalibrating a mana tracer when Nathan leaned into the lab with a grin and a bottle already in hand. Brother-in-law, you've been in that lab for weeks. Your wife is gone. Come on, drinking, gambling, a bit of tasteful whoring. My treat. Sorry, little brother. I'm heading to the Imperial Academy, Daniel replied without looking up. Nathan blinked. Your what? Academy? Why would you want to do that? Vault access. I need some of my old equipment. Nathan had stared for a long moment. Then, with a shrug and a grin, said, Fine, I'll take you. But it would be way more fun to go whoring. I notice you cut out the other stuff. Nathan ignored him. Imperial Academy, that's near the Jidan Sun. Perfect. There is a fantastic whorehouse there that has foreign beauties. We're taking one of the flight fleet carriages. They are expensive to operate, but Father will understand. And I'm not getting blamed if you get mobbed by nerds on the way. That was 2 days ago. He'd been like a kid in a candy store ever since. As they walked deeper into campus, Daniel's eyes scanned everything. The flow of students, the courtyard conversations, people studying, laughing, arguing in central squares. If he didn't know better, he would have thought he was back at a college on Earth, excluding the fact that everyone was dressed like a Chinese fantasy novel. That fact was actually a bit eerie. Dozens of students milled about the open courtyard, and as Daniel and Nathan crossed into view, heads began to turn. The whispers followed. Is that Ethan Joe? And didn't he get exiled? I heard he married into House Lee. No way. That's the same guy? Daniel ignored them all. He walked with the calm of someone who didn't need to explain himself. Chin level, pace steady. hands clasped behind his back. Not out of arrogance, out of control. "You're not exactly popular," he said to Ethan inwardly. Ethan chuckled. "I had the whole moody genius thing down when I was younger. Honestly, I was just awkward and, if I'm being honest, a bit of a dick." "So these people knew you as awkward, Ethan? And you haven't been back since you regressed?" "Didn't seem important at the time. I spent my first couple of weeks just trying to catalog everything leading up to the Demon Clan War. That's really why Caleb had his window with Claire." "Smart," Daniel murmured aloud. "You should show me that list." Ethan flinched. "Of course. It's stupid I haven't as of yet. Sorry, I'm used to working alone." "Brother-in-law?" Nathan said, frowning. "Did you say something?" Daniel glanced at him as they passed a stone gate lined with shimmering ward glyphs. "Let me ask you something," he said. "You being a martial prodigy and all?" Nathan grinned. "What is it? Of course, I'm always happy to bless you with my insights." "I've been thinking about technique execution," Daniel said casually. "Cycling them, specifically." Nathan blinked. "Cycling? How quickly you can execute a martial technique, recover, and fire again. Not just physical readiness, the full chain. Mana infusion, intent alignment, activation sequence." Nathan gave a thoughtful look. "Huh, never broke it down like that. Let's take Wind Lotus Gale Palm. How many times could you cast it in succession, say? 5 times in 15 seconds. Nathan rubbed his jaw. "I can run that technique in my sleep, so pretty fast. But honestly, a better answer for your question is, it depends. You should think of it based on the individual technique. First, difficulty. That sets your mana drain and build-up window. Long or complex techniques take longer to recover." Daniel nodded. All that made sense. He expected as much. And alignment, Nathan added. Battlefield alignment, mental prep, activation flow, it all matters. Intent, breathing, mana pull, and the specific technique script. If even one of those is off, even if you've got the mana, the cast stutters. "So the recovery window," Daniel said slowly, "depends as much on internal cohesion as it does raw power and the actual ability to execute? You need the right mind state to maximize performance." "Right," Nathan agreed. "Battle recovery. That's as good a term as any," he shrugged. "Push a technique when you're not aligned? You'll burden your core. That's why even experts drill basics until they're second nature. The more ingrained the technique, the faster you can reset. That's why high-end users cast like they're breathing." Daniel gave a low hum. "So trained mana and muscle memory reduces the recalibration threshold." Nathan gave him a blank look. "I don't know what that means." Daniel smirked. "Thanks, that answered exactly what I needed." Nathan shrugged. "Only you would treat technique cooldowns like a math problem." Daniel smiled, but his mind was already elsewhere. He doesn't even look at anyone. "I heard he was a prodigy before he lost it. Maybe marrying Vivian Lee fixed him." Daniel let the words drift past. He wasn't here for attention. He was here to recover his tools. Their whispers didn't matter. He didn't know or care about these people. The reception hall rose before them. Glass walls curved like an open scroll, threaded with gold-fused runes. Inside, a young administrator in silver-trimmed robes approached, ledger in hand, unsure whether to bow or run. "Honored guest," he said. "May I ask your business with the Academy?" "I'm here to access a vault under the name Ethan Joe," Daniel replied. The attendant froze. "That account was sealed. It's still mine. Unseal it." The man hesitated. "One moment. I'll notify the senior archivist." As he turned away, Nathan let out a low whistle. "You've got them twitchy." "It's probably you, little brother, the great Nathan Lee," Daniel said. "But if you're bored, you don't have to stay. I like that you understand people and me, brother-in-law. Still, these scholar types need to be taught respect. I will make sure they respect you. Besides, I want to see why this vault of yours gets a reaction like that," Nathan replied. "And the gambling den's closed until dusk." They waited, 5 minutes, then 10. Finally, an older man arrived. Distinguished, robed in muted red with a golden sash of authority. His hair was graying, but his mana presence was sharp and disciplined. "Joe Ethan," he said with practiced warmth. "Or should I say, Lord Joe?" Daniel inclined his head. "Administrator John." "You've returned after a long absence," Jian said. "The Academy remembers its own." Daniel said nothing. "May I ask what stirs your memory now?" "I'm here for some of the contents of my vault. Papers, mostly." Jian's smile thinned. "Those projects were sealed. Some believed they posed undue risk. They were sealed by people who didn't understand them. I'm not here for the projects, just my notes. Still, access is not simple. I'm not asking to publish, just to retrieve. Nathan leaned in. Mr. Scholarman, this is my brother-in-law. He is recognized by my father, General Lee. He gets what he wants. Do not make me intervene on behalf of the Lee household. Nathan's mana flared and his eyes went cold. You wouldn't like that. Jian's eyes widened in surprise. Ethan, you realize marrying into House Lee doesn't make you immune to scrutiny. Daniel met his gaze evenly. True, but it does give me room to impose consequences, hypothetically. A long pause. Then, temporary clearance, limited hours, no assistance, no object removal without inventory record. That'll work. Jian turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. Some of your old colleagues are still here. They will be interested in your return. I'm not here for them. They walked away without another word. Nathan and Daniel entered the stairwell to the lower vaults. Nathan exhaled dramatically. This whole place feels like it wants to spit you out. It did, Ethan said quietly. Daniel walked faster. The vault door opened with a deep thrum, Manalocks disengaging layer by layer. Daniel stepped inside. The air was dry. Still, the space beyond felt more like a tomb than a lab. Dust shimmered in the filtered manalight. Shelves lined the walls, sealed scrolls, etched slates, forgotten apparatuses under draped cloths. Nathan stepped in behind him. Cozy. Brother-in-law, are you sure they didn't hold you prisoner? Do you want me to burn this place to the ground? Daniel tried not to laugh. The funny thing was, Nathan was serious. Daniel just shook his head. It's okay, little brother. They cannot hurt us. He looked around not at the objects, but the structure. This was a place built not for discovery, but containment. He moved to the nearest table. Stacked scrolls. Sealed cases. Ethan's handwriting curled across the labels, technical, precise, quiet. Waiting. Daniel didn't open a single one. These aren't what you need, are they? He muttered. No, Ethan said in his mind. This is the visible. Important, but broken and not very helpful. A picture suddenly came to Daniel's mind. He turned toward the back wall. A flat surface too flat. No shelving. No console. Just reinforced stone. Back there? Daniel asked. Not left corner. There's a crack along the baseboard. Looks like a structural fault. It isn't. Daniel crouched and ran his fingers along the stone. He found it hairline thin, a segment that didn't vibrate quite like the rest. He pressed. A faint click sounded. A rune flashed briefly. A small panel recessed into the wall shifted aside, revealing a hidden storage alcove lined with black crystal. Inside were 3 cases. No labels. No imperial seal. No obvious locking mechanism, just layered reinforcement wards that pulsed faintly like they were holding their breath. Daniel reached for the first case. Carefully, Ethan said, that one houses the sequencing lattice. Daniel opened it. Inside, resting on dark velvet, was a device unlike anything else he'd seen in this world. It looked like a scroll frame, but layered with carved glyph circuitry, mirrored spirit glass, and a double coil of channel wire fused with golden thread. Dozens of switching nodes branched outward like a circuit tree. At its center, an embedded crystal flickered faintly, dormant but not dead. What is it? Daniel whispered. My first attempt at a sequencing engine, Ethan said. It was designed to track and organize embedded spells by execution pattern, not glyph sequence. Input tracking, loop variation, recursive glyph modulation. At the time, I didn't even have the right language to explain what it was doing. Daniel stared at it. You built this here? I built it in pieces, hid it before the deans could classify it. If they'd understood what it did, they would have destroyed it outright. Daniel closed the case gently. What about the others? Middle case has the language binder early prototype for symbolic intent parsing. Don't open it without gloves. The mana started acting strange, dirty almost. I think it was polluted somehow. Right case is a data slate. Notes, design logs. Experimental compression methods for multi-threaded spirit techniques. They are dangerous theoretical, but dangerous if implemented correctly. Some of those entries are banned. Daniel sat back on his heels, staring at the hidden cache. So you weren't just trying to learn spells, he said. You were trying to rewrite what a spell even is. I didn't want to cast faster, Ethan replied. I wanted to cast smarter, cleaner. I wanted to build a system that made the structure visible, not just the result. I also wanted to try to tamper with tempering mantras to see if we could create more specific variations for individuals. Those were my 2 main goals with the framework. Tempering mantras, Daniel thought with a grin. Daniel could feel Ethan's annoyance. You'd call them cultivation methods. But I hate that. Daniel chuckled as he reached out, laying his hand on the sealed case. This is what we needed, he said. The scaffolding. Exactly. Nathan stepped forward, peering over Daniel's shoulder. This the part where I pretend to understand what you're doing? Chapter 42. Daniel. The workbench glowed faintly as Daniel adjusted the calibration node. Thin filaments of light traced lines across the surface, forming a spiderweb of diagnostic glyphs. Ethan's old tech was still functional barely, and was actually really clever, based on his explanation of both the theory and function of the parts. Ethan would have made a hell of an engineer in his world. At the same time, it made Daniel realize how much work had to be done to realize their ambition. The leftover mage tech, materials, and most importantly, the theory and notes were a start. Truthfully, Daniel relished the experience of diving into the magic tech, the problems it presented and the hope for solving them. It was almost like being back home. Around him, the vault hummed with quiet purpose. Shelves of sealed scrolls and crystal casings lined the walls, but Daniel ignored them. He continued to tinker with the old equipment at Ethan's suggestion. The old tech wasn't super helpful, but it was fascinating and helped Daniel understand the bigger picture. Start with flushing the node with your mana, Ethan said in his mind, tone dry but focused. Forget structure. Just check how stable the flow paths are. Daniel nodded to himself and began feeding mana into the sequence relay. He didn't infuse it with emotion or tried not to. He didn't direct it with desire. He simply focused on his mana control and pushed the flow up his arm meridian. It was surprising how easy it was. The glyphs on the lattice began to flicker. Symbols formed and connected into a spell array. The glyphs emerged like circuitry from a dream. It was like watching something from a Marvel movie. Okay now, Ethan said. Give it a command while pushing your mana into that node with intent. Daniel did so. And as he attempted to insert a secondary intent command, the system buckled. The entire array stuttered, sigils blurring, collapsing into nonsense as the light guttered out. Daniel exhaled and leaned back. It's not the structure, he muttered. It's the contamination. Intent, Ethan confirmed. Mana's too expressive. Even when you try to stay neutral, it still leaks. Daniel tapped a stylus against the workbench. So that's what you were working against. What every spell system is built on. Emotionally flavored instructions. It's not a language. It's a scream of mostly gibberish. It works on the individual level has for centuries, but building anything for automation or command instruction is very difficult. Damn near impossible. Daniel stood, walking a slow circuit around the table, while Nathan snored in the corner. He kept thinking back to what he'd seen on this world's communication relay, their Maginet network. A magical system meant for information sharing across the Empire. Enchanted relay crystals, signal flares, public technique registries. But the more he saw of it, the more it reminded him of a memory-corrupted interface. No indexing, no formatting, no logic isolation. Everything ran on mana and intent was unstable. Honestly, it was insane that the damn thing worked at all. They had something akin to TikTok, without a proper mainframe or network. You can't build a reliable network with a medium that changes every time someone's angry, Daniel muttered. And yet we did. Daniel looked down at the sputtering glyph set. This isn't a communication problem, it's a basic structure problem. Go on, Ethan prompted. We're trying to build structure out of raw instinct. Every spell, every glyph, every function, it's hardwired to mana with intent. What we need is a protocol that runs without interference. A language protocol. A way to record that language and reproduce it at will, and then a way to run those protocols based on the language instruction, which should become reproducible. I think the only way that's going to happen is if we have hardware that filters the intent out, or doesn't use mana at all. Daniel shook his head. We need to completely redesign this from the ground up. Power source, hardware, software, operating system, and then long-term power and storage. After that, we can tackle the internet problem. I don't really know what those words mean. But if I'm understanding your context, you want a complete redesign of the system. No one's done that. You're talking crazy, my friend. Daniel smiled faintly. That's the point. If the Empire relies on the system to communicate, anyone with half a brain is going to attack the network the moment a war starts. We have to take care of the obvious weakness. If you want your framework idea to actually work, we start here. First, the power source. He turned back to the table and began sketching diagrams. Lines, nodes, loops. He didn't have the power source yet. Didn't even have a material that could hold the frequency range he wanted. But he could build the blueprint. Have you already thought of options? Ethan asked. Yeah, But you'll have to weigh in, Daniel said. I see three. One, figure out a way to use ultra-pure mana with no intent at all. But I don't even know if that exists. Agreed. A pure mana source is out. 2, develop a filter. Something to pull the intent, corruption, and impurities out of mana, leaving raw power behind. Based on your notes, some divine class materials might do that. They'd be expensive and hard to find, but predictable. I'll take that over unpredictable failure. And 3, Daniel hesitated. Don't use mana at all. Ethan was silent. That's blasphemy. Daniel shrugged. Only if it doesn't work. They then launched into one of the most intense arguments they'd ever had. Daniel didn't notice her at first. The girl stood near the edge of the hall, half-shadowed by a reflection glyph, embedded in the polished stone wall. Her robes were unmarked plain ivory with soft charcoal trim, technically within dress code, but tailored too perfectly to be standard issue. It wasn't just the fit that caught his attention. It was the way she moved, shoulders squared, spine straight, hands at rest but always ready. Quiet confidence. Not someone who needed to shout. She didn't have to. Oh, and the magic clung to her like static electricity at a carpet convention. The girl wore a thin mask across her mouth, common enough among alchemy students, according to Ethan. But it made her look like a villain from a post-apocalyptic thriller. Her eyes were dull brown, unremarkable. But even with the mask and her darkened shoulder-length hair, there was no hiding the posture, the tension of someone used to standing out, which was odd because she clearly wasn't trying to. Interesting, Daniel thought. He was halfway through realigning the diagnostic glyphs when she spoke. Why not hard script the intent into the matrix? She asked softly. Try to use it instead of fighting against it. If the carrier pattern's stable enough, it should overwrite fluctuation and maybe get the reproducible effect you're looking for. Her voice was clear, articulate, but not haughty, measured. Daniel turned slowly. Despite the dullness of her eyes, they were sharp. Alert. Curious. She was built like Marissa Hipp's, bust but taller. Maybe 6 feet. The robe did little to conceal how unapologetically feminine her figure was. Then there was her mana. It wasn't absent, it was concealed. Deliberately, Daniel had taken great strides to learn control, and Ethan said he was doing damn well. But this girl, she was beyond that. She'd mastered stillness, suppression. She wasn't a novice. Not even close. Things were getting very interesting. Daniel kept his tone neutral as he made eye contact. It won't work for what I'm trying to do. If the matrix structure holds memory, residual intent corrupts the input. The bleed-through stacks. And she inclined her head. Then anchor the structure in static arrays. Lock the framework. Separate the machine apparatus from the spell matrix. Reset after every use. That works if you want to cast one spell at a time over and over. Static but not scalable. Not if you want systems sending, receiving, and interpreting input. She blinked. What? You want to build a machine that can cast spells? Daniel grinned. Eventually? Maybe. But first, I want a magic system that can analyze people. Give feedback. Respond. She let out a slow breath. Damn. Talk about ambitious. I've been told I'm crazy. And a bit of an overachiever. She looked him up and down like she was reassessing him. Then, without another word, she turned. She moved with grace, the kind that only the rich or dangerous learned how to fake. At the archway, she paused. Turned. Smiled polite, measured, deliberately forgettable. Marin, she said, you're Ethan Joe, right? Daniel didn't answer immediately. Everything about her voice, posture was composed. But it was too composed, practiced, rehearsed. I've heard your name, she added. Mostly in arguments. Daniel tilted his head. I tend to inspire those. Her smile didn't grow, but her eyes gleamed faintly behind the mask. Well, she said, I hope you find what you're looking for. Then she vanished into the corridor, graceful, unhurried, and far too smooth to be who she claimed. Ethan stirred in the back of his mind. Marin, you think that's her real name? Not a chance. She's clearly in disguise. Odd place to be in disguise. There are all types. Truth. Daniel stared after her. Do we find out who she is? Ethan asked. I don't know. Do we care? Daniel shrugged. Not really. You think she's a spy? Maybe. Maybe not. If she is, she's not a good one. She stands out after 2 minutes of watching her. He turned back to the lattice. But let's assume worst case. She's spying. Could anyone actually figure out what we're building? Ethan hesitated. My old colleagues could maybe get some of the theory. Steal pieces. Try to run with it. Daniel nodded. If they had the tools and the patience and a decade to burn, and they still wouldn't get it right. So, even if she's spying, she can't steal anything. The ideas are too far ahead. Most wouldn't even know where to begin, even if we gave them blueprints. She was sharp, though. Sharp enough to follow. And she didn't want to be recognized, Daniel added, which means she didn't want credit. Just curiosity, a pause. How did you know she was masked? Ethan asked. Daniel blinked. There was mana around her face, Ethan continued. Strange. Not strange. Layered. Daniel walked back toward the casting circle and held his fingers out where she'd stood. 3 folds. 1 cloaking intent. 1 bending perception. 1 bleeding ambient heat. She wasn't just hiding her face. She was hiding how it felt to look at her. Ethan whistled. You saw that with the naked eye? Daniel nodded. Only when I started pushing mana into my sight. Wait, you couldn't do that? Nope. That wasn't in the toolkit. Though, I think our wife can. Daniel chuckled. I don't think it's talent. I think it's intention. The more you try to define it, the more the world listens. He looked down at the still glowing lattice. So, who do you think she is? No idea, Daniel said. Not my world. Right. I forget that sometimes. Daniel shrugged. If this were a script, she's probably someone important, playing it low to gather intel. Could be testing us. Or maybe we're just a side quest in her drama. You think she's Imperial? Maybe. Or maybe she's hunting her brother's killer, the one who died from bullying in a sex school. Her only clue? A corrupted memory crystal and some broken dreams. Ethan paused. What? Daniel shrugged again. If it's her sister, I'd feel bad for taking advantage while comforting her. Ethan laughed silently. You're a menace. I'm a philanthropist. Chapter 43, Nathan Lee. Nathan Lee was bored. And when Nathan was bored, bad things tended to happen. Not war starting bad. Not scandal in the hallway bad. Just structural realignment of certain objects that should not have been kicked off rooftops kind of bad. He wandered the Imperial Academy like a wolf in a gilded birdcage shirt loose, sleeves rolled up, a sword hanging comfortably at his hip, and an expression that said, I dare you to everyone and no one in particular. They didn't build this place for people like him. The Imperial Academy was full of runes and rituals, lectures, and legacies. It smelled like old books and older egos, and despite all the illusion-stitched banners and animated lecture glyphs, Nathan thought the whole place needed one very specific thing. More punching. He passed by a group of students arguing about mana distribution efficiency. One of them flared his core as he spoke, the mana practically shaking off him like sweat. Nathan gave him a pitying look. If your technique's that unstable when you talk, I'd hate to see what it looks like when you fight. They didn't answer. He kept walking. It wasn't that Nathan didn't respect learning. He just thought it ought to come with bruises. He sighed and glanced toward the underground vault, where Ethan, his infuriatingly brilliant, maddeningly composed, and very much not drinking or gambling. Brother-in-law was probably still fiddling with glowing circuits and weird ideas about magic as math. Vivian had married a man who could quietly undo the world. Nathan loved that, but he also kind of wanted to shake him until he agreed to go whoring just once. What's the point of being a noble? Nathan muttered to himself. If you're not allowed to go whoring, it's practically a moral obligation. A pair of students looked at him like he'd set something on fire. Nathan smiled at them sweetly. Study hard, they scurried off. He turned a corner near one of the lower courtyards and was halfway through deciding whether he wanted tea or violence when he heard the voice. A nasal, grating voice, annoyingly abrasive. The kind of voice that needed to be summarily executed. He turned toward a shadowed alcove tucked between 2 archive towers and saw a boy in violet-hemmed robes, standing much too close to a younger girl in junior scholar garb. She stood stiff as a plank, eyes down, jaw tight. Her back was pressed against the wall. His hand was planted on the stone just above her shoulder. You don't have to be scared, the boy was saying. I'm not going to hurt you, unless you want me to be rough. Nathan's boot hit the stone with a loud thump as he approached. The boy turned halfway, annoyed, until he saw who it was. Do you mind? He said. We're having a private... Yes, I mind, Nathan said. You were talking, she wasn't. And now I'm here. The girl flinched slightly, but Nathan gave her a small nod and a cheeky grin. Her expression was one part incredulous, one part panic, like she didn't know if she was supposed to be scared or amused. She settled on scared. The boy stepped up to Nathan. Up close, the boy wasn't impressive. Tall, skinny, pretty enough to pass for noble, with expensive embroidery and rings etched with family crests. But his posture was lazy. The way he held his mana was worse puffed, uncontrolled, leaking intimidation like perfume. Do you know who I am? The boy asked, voice rising with that particular brand of performative entitlement that made Nathan's sword hand itch. Someone forgettable, probably, Nathan said. But I'm all magnanimous and stuff. You've got 10 seconds to make me care. I'm Air Trainee Yen of House Kaio. My uncle is the Northern Exchequer. I sit at the war table twice a cycle. I have 4 dual exemptions and a legal mana license. Nathan stepped closer, smiling. And I'm Nathan Lee of House Lee. I don't need a license. I brought my own sword. He unsheathed it in one smooth draw, fast enough to make a few students nearby stumble backward. The blade sang against the stone as he leveled it directly at Yen's chest. I don't care if your uncle counts coins for the Emperor himself, Nathan said. Voice low now, calm like a tide pulling back. You don't touch women like that. Ever! Yen blinked. You wouldn't dare draw steel on campus. Nathan raised an eyebrow. Pretty sure I just did, you dumbass. A crowd had started to gather, quiet, watching. No one moved to interfere. Not yet. Yen's mana flared defensive, shaky. Nathan didn't even raise his own. You think your uncle will back you? Nathan asked, his tone still friendly. You think the college will protect you when that girl files a complaint and 6 people swear they saw you use coercive pressure casting? No one's going to believe. You're standing in front of a dozen witnesses, Nathan said, wearing your clan's colors, with your mana still spiking. They don't need to believe her. They only need to see you. Yen's mouth opened, closed. Then Nathan leaned forward, the blade still hovering. I don't care if you're the Jaidan's son himself. You don't get to corner a girl like that. You don't get to push and whisper and hide behind your surname like it gives you permission. You do that again, I'll break your teeth and feed them to you in sequence. Yen went pale. Nathan took one step back, lowered the sword an inch, but not all the way. You're lucky, he said, because if my brother-in-law weren't trying so hard to play nice with this school, I'd already have stabbed you in the leg just to see how loud you scream. Yen's composure cracked. He turned and fled without another word. Nathan sheathed the blade and turned to the watching students. Go back to class, unless any of you want to learn about dueling etiquette the hard way. They scattered. The girl whispered a shaky, thank you, before hurrying off, disappearing into one of the lecture halls. Nathan stood alone for a moment, breathing slowly, the chill of mana still buzzing faintly in his bones. He didn't regret it, but he did think about his brother-in-law, about how he'd knelt in front of their father to protect Vivian, about how he carried a strange pressure on his back. His brother-in-law could be lazing around, whoring, drinking, doing pretty much whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted. Vivian wouldn't have cared. Most men in Ethan's situation would have done just that, but not his brother-in-law. His brother-in-law was always studying, always working towards something, focusing on stuff that Nathan didn't understand. His brother-in-law didn't act like a normal noble. His brother-in-law wouldn't have drawn the sword. His brother-in-law would have talked. He would have been calm. He would have been careful. But Nathan wasn't his brother-in-law. Nathan chose to take care of problems with the sword. That was okay with him. Nathan figured that his brother-in-law was probably going to change the world. He was too smart not to. Nathan literally didn't understand half the stuff that came out of his mouth. But that was okay too. His brother-in-law would probably need someone to stab things. Nathan would be ready for that. Besides, this place was already better. More punching. As if summoned by drama, his comm crystal buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and thumbed the message open. A flickering projection shimmered in the air before him, etched with the personal seal of General Lee. The message was short, clean, authority folded into every syllable. Nathan, you have permission to train Ethan in sword technique. Begin immediately, no restrictions. He is to be treated as a Lee. Nathan stared at it, then grinned like a man who had just been handed a very sharp toy. Time to teach my brother-in-law how to bleed properly. Chapter 44, Daniel. The day had begun with equations. Daniel stood at the far end of the vault, carefully returning Ethan's diagnostic lenses to their storage case. The room still buzzed faintly from their last round of tests, a glyph structure half flickering on the projection panel above the main table. The sequencing engine sat dormant now, but Daniel's mind was still looping through problem sets. Yeah, you going to answer that? Nathan asked, gesturing toward the vault door with his chin. Or are we pretending knocks are theoretical today? Daniel closed the case, sealed it with a snap of light, and walked to the door. He sighed. If I asked you to stab someone, would you do it? Nathan snapped to attention. Of course, brother-in-law. Just tell me who needs stabbing. Daniel chuckled as the young woman on the other side of the door, wearing an assistant's sash, held a rolled scroll like it might explode. Honored Joe Ethan, she said, bowing awkwardly. Administrator Jian requests your presence at the symposium currently in session. Daniel didn't react. Nathan did. Symposium? That sounds like a trap. Some kind of torture? Is that what you're doing, assistant lady? Are you trying to torture my brother-in-law? Because I'll feud. Daniel lifted an eyebrow. It was always hard to tell when Nathan was being serious. The woman, to her credit, looked at Nathan like he was a bug. Nathan surprisingly laughed. Then they both ignored him. Optional attendance, obviously, the assistant said quickly, turning back to Daniel. But Administrator Jian said your input would be highly anticipated and might offer a valuable alternative to the prevailing theory. Translation, they want someone they can disagree with, Ethan muttered in his head. Daniel nodded. We'll be there shortly. She bowed again and fled up the stairs. Nathan watched her go. So, what's the plan? They want to talk about Maginot, Daniel said. Let's hear what they have to say. And then, Daniel gave him a faint smile. Then I explain why they're wrong, loud enough that someone important might start to listen. The symposium was held in a lecture amphitheater carved from pale stone, layered with spell echo dampeners and voice clarity runes. There were a lot of people there. The moment Daniel entered, the room went still. Heads turned, some surprised, some curious. Most not friendly. Daniel scanned the crowd. We're going to have to work on your people skills, he muttered. Most of these people are not your fans. Ethan snorted. Faces blurred into names, then snapped into clarity. Professors, research leads, archivists, people Ethan remembered. People who'd voted to seal his vault, who'd discredited his work quietly, without process or accusation. Just silence and distance. Daniel felt old bitterness rise, which was not his own. He thought about Nathan's offer to stab people. It made him smile. At the far side of the room, seated at the center of a semicircle of academic nobility, was Jin Rong. Young, talented, decorated, handsome in a way that drew both patrons and rivals. A golden sash marked him as the Academy's leading authority on array compression and spell construction. Smart and arrogant, Daniel thought. That's rarely a good combination. Did you of all people really have that thought? Shut up, Ethan. Their eyes met. Jin's smile was pure politician shiny and empty. Daniel gave him a polite, teeth-bared, piss-off smile in return. They glared at each other like men who had fought in dreams and still woke angry. What did you do to this guy hit on his mother? Daniel wondered. He looks ready to stab you, me. No idea, Ethan said. He was at the academy, maybe same class. Always thought he was an idiot. Didn't know he was still breathing. Ethan Joe, Jin said smoothly. Or should I say, Lord Lee? It's so hard to keep track of noble titles these days. Daniel didn't stop. He walked calmly toward the platform, now converted into a debate space. Nathan followed, mana flaring in irregular bursts, like a war drum trying to sound casual. You can call me whatever you want, Daniel said, his voice even. It doesn't change the equation. A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. Not everyone got the joke, but enough did. Jin gestured to the empty chair opposite him. Please, we were just discussing the long-term viability of the Maginot. Daniel sat, smoothed his robes. I see why you invited me. Jin's voice lifted just enough for the room to hear. As I was saying, most experts agree. With proper tuning, better materials at the hub, and higher standard casters, the system can be stabilized. Possibly expanded. Tuning, Daniel said. You mean boosting network capacity and optimizing spell priority logic? Exactly, Daniel nodded slowly. And yet the real problem remains. How do you prevent intent corruption during centralized processing? Or meet state-level requirements, memory recall, technique archiving, battlefield indexing? That quieted the room. Even Nathan stopped pacing. Jin's smile twitched. You calibrate the transmission pathways. Build in redundancy. Train casters. Emotional maturity helps. Daniel turned to the audience. So, ignore the system design and just teach people to feel less while singling out single spell efficiency and neuter emotional imprinting so their spells don't bleed. He let that hang. Even if that worked, which it won't, it still doesn't meet the demands laid out by the Imperial family. He tapped the table once, deliberate. They want a stable, searchable, persistent network that optimized spell traffic. One where personal crystals are reliable for battle, for business, for legacy. Secure data storage, spell transmission, repeatable results. He leaned forward. No, you're not fixing the roof. You're patching it with wet parchment thinking like a magician when you should be thinking like an engineer. Several heads turned at that. A few stiffened. Intent isn't a bug, Daniel said. It's a contraindicated variable. Mana carries it like current carries heat. If you can't start clean, you filter. Jin leaned in. How does filtering mana solve that? If intent is the bridge between power and effect, how do you remove it without killing the output? Daniel nodded toward the projection array still flickering above them. A failed sigil hovered mid-collapse. You use filters, he said. Start with ambient, mana-clean, non-human sources if possible. Layer passive suppression sigils. Smart thresholds. Arrays that strip the noise, not the signal. A professor in rust-colored robes raised a hand. Intent can be dangerous, but you cannot separate it from mana. It's what makes spellcasting work. Daniel didn't blink. Intent is the soul. That doesn't mean it should be the wire. This time, the laughter was real. Short, uncertain, but real. Jin folded his hands. If this is such a core flaw, Lord Joe, why hasn't the Maginet failed? Someone in the back called out, What choice do we have but make it work? Another voice added, Yes, what Master Jin said. If it's so unstable, why hasn't it collapsed? And then calm, crisp a new voice cut through the air. Because there is not a single chance of fixing this without a willingness to break it. That fear alone is enough to keep people from doing so. The room stilled. For a moment, the only sound was the soft hum of the broken sigil above, still flickering, still failed. And for once, no one moved to fix it. A voice from the back cleared their throat. Daniel looked up surprised. Chapter 45, Daniel. Daniel turned toward the sound, spotting a sharp-featured academic in her middle years. He couldn't see her name, but the sigil on her sleeve marked her as a structural magecraft senior, someone who actually worked at the central hub of the Maginet in the imperial capital. Why would someone like that be here? She tilted her head slightly. The Maginet is one of the most progressive and restrictive systems the Empire has, but it has major concerns. For example, the cost of maintaining the net rises every cycle, and the more we patch it, the more unpredictable it becomes, which causes more patches, more problems, more failure. Lord Joe, can you explain why that is? Daniel nodded once. The mana as a source of power is only the first issue. The structure behind the Maginet, the system itself, isn't a system. It's 1,000 isolated workarounds pretending to be infrastructure. The Foundation produced smoke, not steel. So, of course, everything built on top of it is going to fail. He paused briefly, scanning the room. Now, it's not even surprising we got here. Bloodline magic works on pure intent, often without an array or activation sequence. Cultivation and battle techniques typically rely on a single array. Those arrays can be complex, but they focus on one effect-even domain spells, which can alter an entire environment, begin from a single unified intent. But that doesn't answer the question, someone else said. Why hasn't it failed? It sounds like you're trying to sell something. That was when another panelist, a heavyset man with a twinkle in his eye, chuckled and said, You're not from the southern provinces, are you? Laughter rippled through the hall, broader now. Daniel didn't smile as he didn't understand the joke, but his voice carried. No, you're not listening. The Maginet hasn't failed because the Imperial family hasn't let it fail. It's the best you have for right now. You all act like the net is sacred, but how many of you have had a relay crash mid-lecture? Or seen 3 different spell returns from the same query? The truth is, it's a bad, poorly designed system. There was a ripple of disbelief and quiet. Another panelist leaned forward. It's not sacred, Lord Joe. It's just all we have. And that, Daniel said softly, is the problem. It is why you are reluctant to let it go. Someone in the back stood up without waiting for permission. If it's so fragile, why can't we just reinforce it? Higher grade casters, better materials, that would dampen the effect of intent contamination, right? The speaker went on, clearly quoting school rhetoric. The Maginet technicians from the academy like Lord Jin believe this approach would stabilize and expand the net. If we use divine-grade materials and had top-tier experts lay the arrays, it should work. I mean, if a peak human master can release thousands of points of sword intent and destroy a city, couldn't the same principle work here? Daniel shook his head. The short answer is no. You're comparing apples to firestorms. Let's break that down. Daniel cleared his throat. Domain-level spellcraft is brilliant in the hands of one master, but it doesn't scale across an empire. It's fine for combat, for personal execution, for momentary control. It's useless when you try to make something universal and repeatable. Besides, using a master doesn't solve the underlying issue, it could make it worse. He paused for effect. A master's intent is stronger, not weaker. That's how they execute high-level spells and techniques. In theory, yes, their control should be better, but their mana is more powerful and their intent more concentrated. If even a fraction of that leaks into the shared stream, he shrugged, the whole thing goes tits up. Ethan laughed. I cannot believe you just said tits up on stage at one of the most prestigious academies in the world. Daniel tried not to laugh himself. No one seemed to notice as a moment of silence followed. Then a voice from the center of the hall murmured, Lord Joe, what do you propose? Daniel's tone was calm but clear, his mind threading through problems and possibilities in real time. If you want to fix the real problem, you need a complete redesign of the apparatus housing the Maginet. Build it like a machine, not a conduit. Use it to develop an instruction-based language. Then, create a task execution system, something that can interpret and repeat commands with consistency. Apply mana and intent to the desired outcome. Once you have that, reproducible results become trivial. Iteration becomes inevitable. That got attention. Still, Daniel was losing patience. He stood for effect and emphasis. You don't fix a broken system by casting louder, he said. Especially not this one. His voice got a bit louder. You fix the Maginet by rewriting how it exists, how it speaks, how it interacts. Strip the bias. Filter the noise. Let the instruction flow clean. Build logic on top of truth, not power. And do it one step at a time. The silence that followed was even denser than before, coiled with thought. People stared, some in awe, some in confusion, a few visibly irritated. No one spoke. Daniel sat down again, calm and deliberate. He didn't care what they thought. A woman near the front leaned toward her neighbor, whispering something as she tapped a sigil interface under the table. Notes, probably. Or a live transcription spell. Half the room was already logging keywords. A few seats over, someone coughed pointed. Jinrong leaned forward, resting his chin lightly on one gloved hand. A complete overhaul, he murmured. Housing language instruction, one that separates intent from structure and execution. He gave a slow, theatrical pause. How quaint, Daniel didn't respond. Jin's smile thinned. It's an inelegant theory, Lord Joe. But surely you realize, all spellcasting relies on intent. Even children know that. Without intent to bridge mana and outcome, there is no effect. You're trying to strip the soul from a system built on instinct. Daniel met his gaze. I'm trying to stop that instinct from burning everything down and build something better. A foundation that gives more control, more consistency, and more function than you've ever dared to imagine. A ripple of laughter broke from the left wing. A few faculty members smiled despite themselves. Jin didn't. He waved a hand, triggering a small illusion. A diagram bloomed between them, an array lattice, softly glowing, pulsing like breath. Let's say you get your system, Jin said. You redesign the architecture, build your language. Your filters work fine. You isolate intent from mana. He tapped the edge of the illusion. The diagram expanded. Circles snapped into rigid lines, nodes locked into a strict grid. Do you know what happens next? His voice had just enough edge to echo. Your spells become mechanical. Dead. Fixed. Your hard coding fire to burn at one temperature, one radius, one duration. No variation. No nuance. Daniel tilted his head. Lord Jin, for a system like the Maginet, that is exactly what you want. Jin's smile faltered, just for a beat. Daniel stood again, slow and steady. The problem you have is you want to have it both ways, he said. You want mana to be expressive when it suits you and predictable when it doesn't. You want the benefits of chaos without the consequences. He let the silence breathe. But a successful structure doesn't care what you want, he said softly. It only cares what you design. If you build it correctly, you can command it at will. From somewhere to the right, a voice muttered low, uncertain. What about emotion? What about identity? Culture? Bloodline legacy? Daniel turned toward the sound, voice steady. You're thinking backwards? You're trying to preserve the ornaments before you've poured the foundation. Specific outcomes come later. They can be layered on top, but they don't belong at the base. Jin crossed his arms. So you would reduce the entire art of spellcasting to engineering? Daniel shrugged. Yes, I'm pretty sure I made that point earlier. But let me be clear. What you've been doing has always been engineering. You just gave it a prettier name and stupider parameters. The room stirred soft murmurs, scowls, a few sharply drawn breaths. Somewhere to the left, someone whispered into a transcription orb. You're scaring them, Ethan murmured in the back of his mind. Daniel didn't respond. He didn't need to, because Ethan was right. Jin leaned back in his chair, visibly relaxed, jaw tight. So what would you build, Lord Joe? Let's say you had your filter, your protocol. What does that give us? Daniel looked around the room, dozens of academics. Some defensive, some curious, many still unsure. You want to imagine it that works. That's reliable. That can accomplish the tasks you envision. Then you need a foundation built on protocols. Instructions that are easier to maintain, easier to debug. A base that can be layered, adapted, and trusted to do exactly what it's told. This, Daniel said, his voice steady as he rose to leave, is how you stop treating spellcraft like ritual and start treating it like a system language, one anyone can learn. He turned from the central platform without waiting for permission. No one stopped him. The debate chamber held its breath as he passed through the circle of panelists, his footsteps slow and unhurried. He could feel every glance tracking him, curious, calculating, alarmed. Not one person moved to intercept. Even Jin Rong didn't speak. Nathan stood from the upper row, arms folded. He fell into step beside Daniel as they exited into the sun-drenched marble corridor. Do you always walk out of rooms like you just announced the apocalypse? Nathan asked. Daniel didn't answer. That was louder than you think, Ethan said. I know. They're going to start watching you more closely now. Not just your theories, your affiliations, your movements. I expected as much. Nathan glanced at him sideways. You going to tell me what that was really about? Daniel exhaled. They wanted a patch. I offered them a rebuild. It's what needs to happen. Nathan snorted. It looked like you slapped them with it. They deserved it. Some of them were listening, Ethan said. Some, Daniel agreed, is enough. They passed beneath a low arch etched with the names of long-dead scholars, philosophers, spellwrights, architects of systems still used without question. Daniel stopped at the threshold. Then he spoke to Ethan. What you built here, he said aloud, was brilliant. What I started, Ethan corrected. Daniel nodded. Time to finish it.
Chapter 49, Liu Anmei. Liu Anmei set her training robe on fire. Again, she didn't mean to. That was the thing. She'd just been thinking too hard. About breath rhythm, spell pressure, and that ridiculously stiff shoulder roll the Li girl insisted on doing in every finishing stance. The mana around her fingers surged the way it always did when she was annoyed. And then, poof, flames again. She sighed and patted it out lazily with one hand, singeing her palm in the process. The burn healed halfway before she even finished standing up. Morning, she said aloud, to no one in particular. Time to ruin something beautiful. Lotus Peak wasn't as peaceful as people claimed. Sure, the birds were quiet. The air was pure. The elder monks all spoke in koans so vague you could hear yourself growing wiser while failing to understand them. But under all that, pressure. It hummed in the stone, in the training yards, in the way the other disciples bowed a little too quickly when Anmi passed them, because they knew who she was. One of the four. Not just beautiful, untouchable. Liu Anmei, the laughing flame of Emberflower Pavilion, dual champion of 7 provinces, owner of 9 broken engagement tokens, 8 stolen, 1 thrown. Try to marry her? In your dreams. Proud, unpredictable, and entirely uninterested in etiquette. She stretched her arms behind her back, letting her joints pop. She watched her own chest bounce. They did so beautifully. Damn right they did. Mana swirled through her in slow, lazy waves, warm, thick, golden orange. Her mana had always had a flame attribute. She didn't know why. She wondered sometimes if her personality was shaped by the fire. Or maybe her personality shaped her mana. She didn't know, but she had always been in the flame. Her mana moved with the kind of heat that made metal sweat. It didn't need direction. It didn't need summoning. It was there. Always ready like, her very breath had an activation sequence built into her intent. Others had to cast. She just had to think and command. Her fans sat folded at her waist. She didn't need them today. Her intent was too low to require activation. And besides, she wasn't hunting. She was bored. She hated it when it was boring. So boring. Down in the courtyard, the Ice Queen was at it again. Week after week, it was the same damn thing. Lee Vivian, all straight lines and cold perfection, like someone had forged her from sculpted snowfall. She moved through her sword form, what was that one called? Piercing edge? Like she'd been born for it. Relentless. Practiced. Perfect. And Anmei hated it, and not because it was bad. Because it was so good she wanted to throw something at it just to see what would happen. She turned away from the crane of the Lee house and hopped onto the edge of a low training wall, balancing effortlessly on her toes, and let her mana flare just enough to warm the air around her shoulders and empower her body. Then she called down, voice bright and impossible to ignore. "Are you ever going to relax, Icicle?" Vivian didn't flinch, but in a blurring move, she threw an icicle at Anmei. She dropped from the wall with a somersault, rolled to her feet, and bounced once on her heels. Sparks trailed her steps, and she moved down the mountain. She waved to a few stunned disciples who immediately scurried out of her way. "Back in 5, ladies," she said cheerfully. She touched the shawl of one of the girls. "Oh, I love that." She was pretty sure none of them had even dared look her in the eyes. Gods, it was exhausting being famous and awesome. Definitely awesome. 2 hours later, after a brief joy brawl with the training dummy, it exploded, technically not her fault. She wandered toward the center pavilion, where meals were usually taken after morning sessions. And there they were, Vivian, sitting alone at one end of the long bench table, back straight, blade polished and laid beside her like a guard dog, and a little further down Yume-shan, the poet of Earth. A spirit cultivator, impossibly elegant, rumored to have shattered a man's cultivation just by writing his name in calligraphy. Anmei grinned. She was her kind of girl. She grabbed some dumplings and walked straight over, dropped onto the bench with zero grace, and threw her arms across the table between them. "Well, isn't this a deliciously awkward silence? Maybe you guys should make out." Neither of them looked at her. Hey, oh, how fun. The silence at the table was exquisite. A bit tense, a bit uncomfortable, all awkward, but still, perfectly arranged like a garden someone had raked exactly once and then forbidden anyone from walking across. Vivian Lee sat at one end, posture erect, hands folded in that way that said, "This conversation is beneath me, but go ahead and try anyway." Her blade rested beside her bowl like a declaration. Yume-shan sat at the other, quiet as a stone that had decided to wait out the next 3 centuries. Her robes were draped in dusty gold and moss green. She didn't eat. She didn't blink. She just breathed like an old tree-deep, slow, permanent. You see what she did there? Wood and stone, a spirit cultivator. Good Lord, she was clever. Anmei could see the ambient mana swirling toward Yume-shan. And then there was Liu Anmei, sitting squarely in the middle, slurping dumplings like they were divine truth wrapped in dough. She chewed thoughtfully. "You know," she said, mouthful, "if I didn't know better, I'd say we were avoiding each other on purpose." Neither woman responded. Anmei popped another dumpling into her mouth and pointed her chopsticks at Mei-shan. "You've said maybe 3 words in the 2 weeks I've been here. Are you meditating or judging me?" Mei-shan didn't look up. "Yes." Vivian snorted barely. Anmei perked up. "Oh, was that emotion? Did the glacier crack?" Vivian looked up slowly. "I'm trying to enjoy my silence." "And I'm trying to enjoy your company," Anmei replied. "Let's call it a draw." Mei-shan raised an eyebrow. "I bet you're a joy at parties." A few disciples sat at the far tables, eating in quick, quiet gulps like they'd wandered into a room with wild predators and couldn't figure out how to back out without getting eaten. Anmei watched them for a moment, then leaned toward Mei-shan. "You notice no one else sits within 4 tables of us? That's because they respect the sanctity of lunch," Mei-shan murmured. Vivian didn't even look. Or they're terrified. Anmei leaned back with a grin. "Good. They should be." For a moment, the 3 of them just sat. One fiery and loud, one cold and sharp, one calm and ancient. 3 of the most feared and admired cultivators of their generation sharing dumplings and unspoken burdens in the middle of a silent mountain. Anmei tapped the table. "So, we're here. Together. No wars. No husbands or boyfriends. No overbearing masters breathing down our necks. Why aren't we talking about anything that matters?" Vivian sipped her tea. "Because some of us came here to train." "And some of us," Anmei said, "came here to breathe." She glanced at Mei-shan. "You?" Mei-shan finally looked up. "I came to listen." Anmei blinked. "Oh, she speaks in riddles and hints. I love that." She turned her attention back to Vivian. "So, Ethan Joe." Vivian didn't flinch, but her grip on the teacup changed. Slightly. "You're married to him. That's public record. Is it public record that he might be smarter than all of us combined?" Vivian set her cup down with care. Anne May beamed. Just asking. For context. Vivian exhaled through her nose. He's brilliant. He's irritating. We have an arrangement. He doesn't chase. He respects you, Machen said softly. Your boundaries. That is rare for political marriages. Vivian didn't respond. Anne May sat back, watching the two of them in turn. Then she said, in a voice too light to be casual, I'm confused. Do you want him to chase you? Vivian didn't answer, but she didn't deny it either. The moment passed. Outside, wind rustled through the cherry trees lining the outer path. A pair of acolytes darted past the window, whispering too fast for Anne May to catch the words. She stretched, reached for more dumplings, and said, You know, it's funny. They call us the Four Great Beauties, like we're flowers in a royal garden. She looked between them, but all I see at this table are weapons. Machen said nothing. Vivian didn't disagree. Anne May grinned. Good. Since you're being all stoic and boring, take a look at this. Chapter 50. Vivian. The projection orb glowed faintly where it floated above the table. Vivian leaned forward, fingers grazing the rim of her teacup as Ethan's image came into focus. Ethan was seated on a lecture stage at the Imperial Academy alone against a half-ring of lecturers, faculty heads, and spellcraft specialists. An amphitheater full of prestige pomposity and posers. Vivian blinked. Ethan. Ethan was on the screen. What was he doing there? At the front of the room sat Jin Rong, a blowhard from the second-tier Rong family who thought they were the god's gift to academia. Ever polite, ever shining, leading the discussion with oiled charm. Vivian barely noticed him or the half-dozen intellectuals who sat opposite her husband. She was watching Ethan. It was strange to see him, even from a projection. He looked good relaxed, but not particularly engaged, like he was tired. She wondered if he was eating well. There was color in his cheeks. Maybe he wasn't sleeping well? His eyes looked a bit tired. Also, did he look a little bigger? More defined? Was he actively training? That would be good for him. It was strange how he could be so disengaged and somehow have the whole damn crowd lean forward when he spoke. She wondered how she would feel once she saw him, and what she felt was annoyed. Weeks without a message. No notes. No coded updates through the house channels. It was like his wife didn't even exist to him. She thought about messaging him, but he was the man. Her husband. He should be checking in on her, not the other way around. The whole damn thing pissed her off. She'd told herself it didn't matter. That he was studying, experimenting, building whatever strange project he needed to feel useful. But in the depths of the night, when she let her thoughts wander, she found herself irritated that her husband had not contacted her once since she left. What kind of husband does that? Ethan said something, and the projection orb panned to the audience, who were laughing and whispering to each other behind fans. What the hell? Why were there so many women there? Who was that girl in the front? The blonde with the big eyes? Was she waving at him? She was cute too. Damn it. People quieted when he spoke. It was measured, confident, impossibly calm. It wasn't just clarity in speech, but the command of dictation. He wasn't challenging their ideas. He was replacing them. And they were listening. Vivian's thumb traced a slow circle against the teacup's rim. Her expression remained unreadable. Composed. But something in her chest tightened. He'd changed, or maybe... She thought bitterly. He'd always been like this. And she had simply never looked closely enough. The room on the projection rippled with energy. The panelists pressed in with questions. Jinrong tried to reassert control, question him, embarrassment. He tried to embarrass her husband? The nerve of this man. Ethan didn't flinch. He spoke, and the room held its breath. Vivian set the teacup down with more force than necessary. The sharp clink of porcelain on lacquered wood cut through the silence. Machen and Anne May looked up but said nothing. Vivian reached for her message crystal. The pulse of mana flared softly as she activated the link. Vivian. May. There was a symposium at the Imperial Academy. Looks recent within the last few days. I want the full recording. There was a brief pause before May's voice returned, filtered through the crystal. May. Understood, my lady. May I ask why? Vivian. My husband was there. Vivian's eyes narrowed. Her voice, when it came, was quiet. Vivian. I want every word said in that room. Cross-reference the transcript names, affiliations, reactions. Watch who moves. Watch who doesn't. Get it to my quarters within the hour. May. At once, my lady. Vivian ended the link and set the crystal down gently, far more gently than the teacup. Her expression gave nothing away, but the room felt colder than it had a moment before. Vivian refocused on the projection along with Meishan and Anmei. He had been quiet, not contacting her. The few updates she got from her mother didn't even mention Ethan. She'd thought that no news meant nothing was happening. She closed her eyes for a moment, then whispered to herself, barely audible, "What have you been up to?" "The consensus," Jinrong was saying in his endlessly polite, endlessly smug voice, "is that Maginette can be stabilized with high-standard casters and refined calibration techniques." Vivian narrowed her eyes. That argument again. Then the projection shifted. There was additional speaking that Vivian didn't hear. Ethan didn't flinch, didn't raise his voice. But it didn't matter because when he spoke, the room leaned forward anyway. "Let's break that down," he said calmly. Domain-level spellcraft is brilliant in the hands of one master, but it doesn't scale across an empire. It's fine for combat, for personal execution, for momentary control. It's useless when you try to make it universal. And using a master doesn't solve the underlying issue. It could make it worse. The camera angle cut to the crowd, a dozen panelists shifting in their seats. A master's intent is stronger, not weaker. That's how they execute high-level spells and techniques. In theory, yes, their control should be better, but their mana is more powerful and their intent, more concentrated. If even a fraction of that leaks into the shared stream. On the screen, Ethan shrugged. The whole thing goes tits up. A moment of silence followed. Vivian could practically feel the ripple through the projection. There was more jaw-jacking. Unimportant people saying unimportant things. Ethan's tone didn't change and started listening again when her husband spoke. If you want to fix the real problem, you need a complete redesign of the apparatus housing the Maginette. Build it like a machine, not a conduit. Use it to develop an instruction-based language. Then create a task execution system. Something that can interpret and repeat commands with consistency. Once you have that, reproducible results become trivial. Iteration becomes inevitable. The projection caught Jinrong leaning forward, his smile tightening. "A complete overhaul," he said. "Housing, language, instruction, one that separates intent from structure and execution." "It's an inelegant theory, Lord Zhou, but surely you realize, all spellcasting relies on intent. Even children know that. Without intent to bridge mana and outcome, there is no effect. You're trying to strip the soul from a system built on instinct." Ethan met his gaze. "I'm trying to stop that instinct from burning everything down and build something better. A foundation that gives more control, more consistency, and more function than you've ever dared to imagine." Vivian leaned forward slightly. That line. Then came the moment. Ethan turned to the projection crystal above them, where a failed relay sigil still flickered, and said, "You want a Maginette that works. That's reliable. That can accomplish the tasks you envision. Then you need a foundation built on protocols. Instructions that are easier to maintain. Easier to debug. A base that can be layered, adapted, and trusted to do exactly what it's told." "This," he said, his voice steady as the room held its breath, "is how you stop treating spellcraft like ritual and start treating it like a system language, one anyone can learn." Anmei let out a slow whistle beside her. "Your husband just told the Academy their sacred invention was pig shit wrapped in arrogance and polished with their own faces." Vivian didn't answer. Meishan leaned forward, voice hushed. "He wants to rebuild the entire magical backbone of the Empire. Not patch it, replace it. Bold. Have to love a bold man." The image froze on Ethan's final expression. Calm, head tilted, like he wasn't sure why everyone looked so surprised. Vivian stared at the projection, her fingers resting lightly on the edge of her cup. Ethan had never talked like this before. Bold, direct, unapologetic. He continued to surprise her. Ethan Zhou had always been known for being quiet, observant, brilliant, yes, but inward-facing, reserved, not someone who challenged consensus, let alone rewrote it. This was something else. Architecture. He wasn't dismantling the system for shock value. He was diagramming a new one mid-conversation and daring the room to imagine it could work. Anmei tilted her head. "Good Lord, he is sexy." Vivian and Machen looked at her, and me shrugged. What is he like in bed? If you don't want him, Lady Ice, can I have him? Vivian stood abruptly. I'm heading back to my room. May brought her a recording of the projection. Vivian watched the discussion 3 more times. She didn't understand what her husband was talking about. She didn't like that she didn't understand it. Her crystal charm sat stationary against her wrist. She looked down. No message. Of course not. Why would he write? It had been weeks. That's it. Enough is enough. Vivian tapped her charm, but not to her husband, who was too busy to write her. She wrote to someone else. Vivian. Nathan, it's your sister. There was a suspicious delay. Then, Nathan. Oh no, my scary older sister. What did I do? Vivian blinked. The boy was too casual for someone raised in a martial household. Vivian. Nothing. I have a question. Nathan. Okay, but do I need to sit down for it? Because I have never gotten a message from you before. I thought this device was defective for brother-to-sister communication. I should write an apology letter to the makers of my crystal. She didn't dignify that with a response. Vivian. How is your brother-in-law adjusting? Nathan. Oh, big brother Ethan? Vivian. Yes. Nathan. He's kinda scary, not even kidding, it's so freaking awesome. Vivian paused. Vivian. Explain. Nathan. He's been training like mad in the Lee sword style. Father allowed a full tutorial. He has me Master Shen helping him. He's pretty much crushing it. Your husband is kind of a badass. Vivian stared at the glowing text. That made no sense. Vivian. Wait, they gave him full access? Not just the first movements like the branch families? Nathan. Yeah. One guy protested. Tried to say he wasn't worthy. Can you believe that? My brother-in-law not worthy? The bastard. I wanted to stab him, but brother-in-law wouldn't let me. They honor-dueled, mind you. This was only a week after brother-in-law started training. It's like the guy has a cheat code or something. Anyway, brother-in-law dropped him in 2 moves. With basic footwork. With some mana this time. His control is coming along great. And he is picking up the technique so fast that it makes me jealous. Vivian. That isn't possible. Nathan. It's true. Through brother-in-law complains about not understanding or something. I don't know. He is hard to follow most of the time. Anyway, I have to ask my darling sister. What the hell did you do to this man? Because he is training and learning like a guy possessed. Did you promise the guy a child if he mastered the sword or something? That sounds like something you'd do. Vivian's fingers tightened slightly around her wrist. She could feel the veins popping in her temple. She made a mental note to beat her brother to death when she saw him next. As for Ethan, she didn't know. The Ethan she remembered had raw power so pure it bordered on divine, but he had 0 control over his mana. But this? He was practicing Lee swordsmanship, her family's style, the most precise and mana-intensive sword school in the Empire. It was also the most difficult, and the most dangerous. And he was learning, and thriving while doing it. Vivian sat in her room, softly lit, quiet. No attendance, just shelves of binding scrolls and a single lacquered desk. She pulled a fresh strip of silk-threaded parchment and smoothed it flat. Her calligraphy pen hovered for a second. Then she began to write. The 10 movements, the 10 techniques, her interpretation of the foundational Lee sword work, passed only to blood heirs and martial-paired spouses. It wasn't romantic, not overtly. But in a world like theirs, offering someone this knowledge was damn near making out in the cloak closet. She reviewed each character, edited a bit. At the bottom, she stamped it not with the House Lee seal, but her personal crest. Then she tapped the message crystal and opened a private thread. Vivian. I hear you've begun training. These may help. 10 movements, 10 techniques. Use them. Or don't. Lady Lai. She hit send, then turned the charm face down. And didn't move. Just waiting. Quietly. Without reason. The jerk better write her back.
Chapter 51, Daniel. The notification flicked across his charm with a muted chime. Daniel didn't look up at first. Still focused on his grip alignment. adjusting the hilt of Qinglin's silence to reduce wrist torque. The blade had a weight to it that didn't match its mass like. It carried expectation. He exhaled, sheathed it, and checked the message. Vivian, I hear you've begun training. 10 movements. 10 techniques. Use them. Or don't. Lady Lee Daniel blinked. No greeting. No preamble. No insult. Lady Lee? What is this, a state announcement? The first time he'd heard from his wife in how long, and not even a hello. Just a scroll attachment. He opened it with a flick of his finger. 10 columns unfurled in clean silver script calligraphy, annotated in her hand. Technical. Precise. Almost surgical. He read the first line aloud, almost involuntarily. Iron vein. If your stance breaks, your spirit will follow. Basic movement form. 4 steps. Forward, back, side, side. Teaches structural integrity, static pressure handling, and directional balance. Rooted in breath, anchoring, and grounding footwork. He raised an eyebrow. Thanks for the encouragement, he muttered, then sat down on the practice bench. Crystals still glowing faintly in his palm. He scrolled. The 10 movements of the Lai sword. Foundational martial disciplines used for shaping body, breath, and basic blade rhythm strikes. This is my take on them. Nathan tells me you're doing well. We should spar when I get back. We can have a bout, and the loser will owe the winner a favor. Iron vein. If your stance breaks, your spirit will follow. Basic movement form. 4 steps. Forward, back, side, side. Teaches structural integrity, static pressure handling, and directional balance. Rooted in breath, anchoring, and grounding footwork. Piercing edge. 1 cut, 1 heartbeat. The Lee family's signature dueling stance and first strike. A forward slash. Minimalist, efficient, and relentlessly aggressive. Designed to strike through single opponent gaps using tempo, micro adjustments, and a monolash from the wrist down the blade to add weight and edge. Falling sky. Let the heavens fall first. You'll still be standing. A redirection movement designed to absorb and deflect high-force techniques like piercing edge and mana projectiles. Primarily defensive, taught for facing long-range or superior blade cultivators. Wind cross. To move unseen is to survive. Mobility form built on off-angle slashes and evasive, mana-empowered footwork. Incorporates sudden stance changes to disorient heavier or slower opponents. Note, this will take a lot of practice. Make sure your mana flow, intent, and activation are advanced level before you attempt. Mirror Fang. What strikes you dies by reflection. Counter movement form. Reacts in real time to enemy technique, converting their attack into a mirrored fatal strike. Demands precision and perfect read timing. 7 steps of silence. The fight ends before they know it began. Entry form. A blindingly fast blitz technique using optimized footwork tempo to break defensive lines or approach multiple enemies through shifting rhythms. Bloodline oath. Your spirit is not your own, it belongs to your house. A forward lunging slash that begins with a grounded left step advance, followed by a rising diagonal cut from hip to shoulder. The motion channels internal mana through the chest and shoulders, reinforcing the cut with more force than most strikes. When executed correctly, the strike leaves behind a faint, echoing slash. Blade lineage. Every strike echoes your ancestors. A slow, deliberate kata that begins with a diagonal draw from the hip, followed by a spiraling overhead sweep and controlled return to guard. Each motion is synchronized with breath and heartbeat, cycling mana through the arms, blade, and spine in a continuous loop. Used to attune the cultivator's rhythm to a specific weapon, especially heirloom blades or spirit-forged artifacts. When performed correctly, the movement leaves a harmonic trail of mana behind each cut, reinforcing the bond between wielder and lineage. Best practiced alone, in silence, at dawn. Crushing horizon. 1 strike to shatter the tide, power form. Wide, mana-reinforced sweeps meant to collapse shields, disrupt energy flow, and decimate groups or armored targets. Often used by frontline commanders. The empty hold. There is no fear, no doubt, only execution. A forbidden movement. Erases emotion, channeling only void sword intent and chaos mana. Lethal and irreversible. Suppressed after past abuses during the Eastern campaigns. Very dangerous, can cut through just about anything, but can backlash and destroy the user. The 10 techniques of the Lai sword. Vivian's creations. Battlefield executable strikes derived from the movements above. Crescent step cleave. Movement 2, piercing edge. A diagonal slash timed with a mana flicker that severs energy channels mid-cast. Used to interrupt spellcasting. Sundering point, movement V, blade lineage. A mana compression thrust that punches through heavy armor and spiritual barriers can actually create a projectile of sword force. Ghost Veil Disarm, Movement Fear, Windcross. A fluid wrist roll maneuver that redirects weapon arcs while rotating behind the opponent. Ideal for disarm plus counter grapple. Falcon Cross, Movement 3, Falling Sky. A feint heavy combo. Draws a high guard, then shifts to a low pivot cut from the opposite shoulder, baiting misread counters. Spiral Wound Return, Movement 7, 7 Steps of Silence. If a slash misses, this technique spirals the blade back on a tight angle, often catching the enemy mid-recovery. Vaulting Blade Turn, Movements 4 and 9. A dynamic leap turn maneuver used to reposition and recover vertical dominance while keeping the blade active. Shadow Twin Execution, Movement 6, Mirror Fang. A tempo-matching feint followed by an actual strike delayed by 1 heartbeat, landing as the enemy finishes their counter. Breathlock Slash, Movement V, Blade Lineage. Tuned to enemy breath rhythm. A delayed ultra-precise strike that disrupts cultivation cycles and internal mana flow. Fangs of the Lee, Special Combo. A 3-strike pattern using family-locked footwork. Slash, feint, drop lunge. Must be taught directly, cannot be learned from scrolls. Blade Echo Recall, linked to the empty hold. Leaves a memory scar of a strike in space for a short period of time. If the opponent steps into that line again, the blade's energy manifests a second cut. Daniel read it all once, then again. He'd seen all of this in one form or another, but nowhere had he seen the movements, techniques, and consideration broken down and explained so cleanly. No wonder she was the heir apparent. He didn't rush to try them. He didn't stand or pose or draw diagrams. He just sat there and let the silence build. She gave me her interpretation of her air scroll, he murmured. Ethan stirred inside his head. Do you understand what she just did? I think so. She opened the door. She's waiting to see if you can walk through it. Daniel exhaled through his nose and stood, slowly, with intention. He moved to the center of the training circle. He took up the stance and aligned his posture. Iron vein, feet flat, knees slightly bent, spine aligned, shoulders low, breath steady. Interesting. There was no dramatic surge of mana, no spell array to unnaturally empower the body. Just Daniel standing still in the shape of readiness. He held the form. He took one breath, moving it with his mana. Then another. He shifted. Forward. Back. Side. Side. 4 steps. Measured. Rooted. Clean. He repeated the sequence again. This time slower, tracking balance across his arches, testing how the tension in his spine reacted to small adjustments in breath, weight, and mana movement. The pattern felt simple, but simplicity, he realized, was a lie told by people who didn't understand the work. Iron Vein wasn't about movement. It was the movement that forced the breath. It was about structure. It was the test that came before all others. Can your body follow a command? Can your breath obey timing? Can your thoughts stay silent long enough to listen? He finished the 4th repetition and stopped. His body remembered it now. Not perfectly, but enough. A spark of confidence touched his core. A small, quiet sensation of something beginning to settle into place. Ethan spoke, voice softer. You're a bastard, you know that? The first time I worked with the Joe family footwork, I almost broke my foot. Daniel smiled faintly. No, you would. A flicker of amusement, then silence again. He turned back toward the bench and picked up the scroll Vivian had sent. He enlarged the projection, looked again at the glyphs she'd written beside each movement crisp strokes, slightly slanted her personal hand. This was a gift, a really valuable one, Ethan said. If I didn't know any better, I'd say she likes you. Daniel rolled his eyes. Nothing more distracting than a pretty face, my friend. Daniel sat down and started copying everything that Vivian had sent him. He considered each of the movements and techniques, taking his own notes and marking his own thoughts as he compared them to hers. Damn, she was really good. This woman was just impressive. He got up and tested the Iron Vein again. 1 form down, 9 to go. And somewhere far above him, in the still silence of a mountain estate, he hoped she felt it when he stepped into the rhythm, because she was holding open the door, and he was going to walk through it.
Thanks for listening to the Foundation of Smoke and Steel. What you just heard is the rough YouTube version, unedited, closer to the raw draft as the story takes shape. If you want the polished release, the refined chapters, improved pacing and the full experience, you can find it on JC Anderson's Patreon and on the serial site Royal Road, along with early access to upcoming chapters. See the link in the description. Your support there directly helps keep the story going. Until next time.